She was the most powerful woman in the company, and she showed up at his door on Christmas night, alone, with snow in her hair and tears in her eyes. Evan Hart had nothing, a failing career, a daughter slipping away, and an empty apartment that echoed with everything he'd lost. But when CEO Camilla Vance confessed why she'd come, he realized the woman who had everything was drowning in the same silence he was. What happened next would change both their lives forever. If this story touches your heart, please like, subscribe, and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The Christmas lights blinked in their tired mechanical rhythm, red, green, casting pale shadows across the water-stained ceiling of Evan Hart's apartment. He sat motionless on the worn couch, a half-empty bottle of beer warming in his hand, watching the cheap plastic tree flicker like a dying heartbeat in the corner of the room. Outside, Portland had wrapped itself in a blanket of fresh snow, the kind of snow that made the city look clean, hopeful, almost magical, the kind that children pressed their faces against windows to see. But inside apartment 4B of the Millbrook Gardens complex, there was no magic. There was only silence, and the weight of another Christmas spent alone. Evan lifted the beer to his lips, then set it back down without drinking. What was the point? The alcohol wouldn't warm the cold that had settled into his bones years ago. It wouldn't fill the empty chair at the small kitchen table where Mia used to sit, swinging her legs and chattering about reindeer and cookies and whether Santa really knew if you'd been good. Mia! His chest tightened at the thought of her. She was with his former in-laws tonight, the Hendersons, at their sprawling house in Lake Oswego. They'd picked her up 3 days ago. Margaret Henderson's smile tight and polite as she'd assessed his apartment with barely concealed judgment. The peeling paint by the window, the radiator that clanked and groaned through the night, the Christmas tree that Evan had bought at a gas station for $12 because the tree lots were already closed by the time his shift ended. "We'll have her back on the 27th, Margaret had said, her hand resting possessively on Mia's shoulder. "Unless you'd like us to keep her through New Year's. The cousins will be visiting, and there's the ski trip to consider." Evan had wanted to say no. He'd wanted to scoop his daughter into his arms and tell the Hendersons that Christmas was supposed to be spent with family, with him. But Mia had looked up at him with those big brown eyes, the same eyes her mother used to have, and he'd seen something that broke him. Relief. Relief at the prospect of escape. Relief at leaving this cramped, sad apartment behind. So he'd said yes. Because what else could he do? He couldn't give her ski trips and cousins and a house with a proper chimney for Santa to climb down. He couldn't give her the childhood she deserved. All he could give her was love, and lately, he wasn't even sure that was enough. The clock on the wall read 11:23 p.m. Christmas Day was almost over. In 37 minutes, it would just be another Thursday, and Evan could stop pretending he had anything to celebrate. He pushed himself up from the couch and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Below, the parking lot was nearly empty. Most of his neighbors had somewhere to be tonight, families to visit, parties to attend, people who wanted them around. The few cars that remained were buried under inches of snow, abandoned like forgotten promises. A couple walked past on the sidewalk below, laughing and holding hands, their breath making clouds in the frozen air. The woman leaned her head against the man's shoulder, and he pulled her closer, protective, tender. Evan watched them until they disappeared around the corner, then turned away from the window. On the bookshelf beside the TV, a row of framed photographs stood like monuments to a different life. There was Evan and Sarah on their wedding day, young and stupid with hope, her hair pinned up with white flowers and his rented tux a size too big. There was Mia as a baby, red-faced and screaming in the hospital, Evan's exhausted grin visible in the corner of the frame. There was the three of them at Cannon Beach, building a sandcastle that the tide would claim before sunset, none of them knowing that their marriage would crumble just as easily. Evan picked up that last photo, running his thumb across the glass. Sarah looked so happy in it. They all did. It was hard to remember that they'd argued the entire drive to the coast, that Sarah had accused him of working too much and caring too little, that Mia had cried in the back seat for 45 minutes straight because she wanted her stuffed elephant and they'd left it at home. But the photograph didn't capture any of that. It captured only the moment when they'd decided to pretend, when they'd built their castle and smiled for the camera, and acted like everything was fine. That's what photographs did. They lied beautifully. Evan set the frame face down on the shelf. He couldn't look at Sarah's smile tonight. Not when he could still hear the echo of their last conversation, 3 years ago now, her voice tired and final through the phone. "I can't do this anymore, Evan. I can't be married to someone who's never here. I'm working to provide for this family. You're working to avoid this family. There's a difference." She'd been right, of course. She usually was. He'd thrown himself into his job at Vance Industries, telling himself it was for them, for Mia, for their future. But the truth was messier than that. The truth was that work was easier than marriage. Spreadsheets and shipping schedules didn't argue back. Inventory reports didn't cry or demand things he couldn't give. At the office, he knew exactly what was expected of him. At home, he was constantly failing tests he didn't know he was taking. So Sarah had left. She'd taken a job in San Francisco, something in marketing that she'd always wanted to try, and she'd asked for shared custody that somehow always worked out in her favor. Then, 18 months ago, there was the car accident on Highway 101. A drunk driver, a rainy night, a phone call that Evan would replay in his nightmares for the rest of his life. After Sarah died, the Hendersons had swooped in with their lawyers and their money and their carefully worded concerns about Mia's stability and appropriate living conditions. They tried to take her completely at first, arguing that a warehouse logistics coordinator who worked 60-hour weeks wasn't fit to raise a child alone. Evan had fought them, burned through his savings on legal fees, begged his boss for schedule adjustments, proved in court that he was capable, that he was present, that he loved his daughter more than anything in this world. He'd won, technically, but victories like that came with fine print. Now Mia split her time between his apartment and their mansion, between his frozen dinners and their private chef, between his best efforts and their effortless abundance. And every time she came back from Lake Oswego, she seemed a little more distant, a little more polished, a little less like the girl who used to fall asleep in his arms during movie nights. The Hendersons weren't evil. Evan knew that. They loved Mia in their own way. And they'd lost their daughter too, lost her in a way that no parent should have to endure. But their love came with conditions, with expectations, with a subtle but constant reminder that Evan would never be enough. He walked to the kitchen and dumped the rest of his beer down the sink, watching it swirl down the drain. The refrigerator hummed its lonely song behind him. Inside, there was half a container of leftover Chinese food, a carton of eggs past their expiration date, and a bottle of hot sauce that had been there since he moved in. Merry Christmas. The overtime shifts had seemed like a good idea when he signed up for them. Double pay for working through the holiday week. Enough money to maybe catch up on the credit card bill, or fix the car's heater, or buy Mia something better than the discount store art supplies he'd wrapped in newspaper because he couldn't afford proper wrapping paper. But his supervisor had sent everyone home early today. "Go be with your families," Martinez had said, clapping him on the shoulder with genuine warmth. "The shipments can wait." The shipments could wait, but Evan couldn't go home to his family because his family was 45 minutes away in a house where he wasn't welcome. So he'd come back here, to this empty apartment, to sit alone with his beer and his regrets and pretend that was a choice he'd made. The truth was harder than that. The truth was that he was tired, bone-deep tired, the kind of exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch, tired of struggling, tired of failing, tired of watching Mia look at him with that mixture of love and disappointment that reminded him so much of Sarah. He'd thought about calling her tonight, had picked up his phone 3 times, scrolled to her contact, then put it back down. What would he say? "Hi, sweetheart. I miss you. I'm sorry I'm not there." She knew he missed her, and his apologies had become so frequent they'd lost their meaning. Words were easy. Being the father she needed was hard. Evan sank into the kitchen chair and put his head in his hands. The apartment felt smaller than usual tonight, like the walls were slowly pressing inward. The Christmas tree blinked on. The radiator clanked and hissed. Somewhere in the building, someone was playing music, something soft and melancholy that filtered through the walls like a ghost. He wondered what Mia was doing right now. Probably asleep in the Hendersons' guest room, the one with the canopy bed and the white furniture and the window overlooking the garden. Probably dreaming of the presents she'd opened this morning, the real presents, the iPad and the designer clothes and the dollhouse that was bigger than his bathroom. He'd sent his gift along with her when she left. The art supplies. a handmade card with a drawing of the two of them that he'd copied from that beach photograph. Inside, he'd written, "To my favorite artist, love, Dad." He hadn't asked what she thought of it. He wasn't sure he could handle the answer. The knock came at 11:47 p.m. Evan's head snapped up from his hands. For a moment, he was sure he'd imagined it, a trick of the radiator, or the building settling in the cold. No one knocked on doors at this hour on Christmas night. No one knocked on his door at any hour, really. His social calendar wasn't exactly overflowing. But then it came again. 3 knocks, firm but not forceful, like someone who wasn't sure they wanted to be heard. He stood slowly, his heart doing something strange in his chest. It was probably Mrs. Patterson from 4A, he told himself. She sometimes got confused, wandered the halls looking for her late husband's apartment, or maybe a neighbor locked out in the snow, needing to use his phone. He crossed to the door and peered through the peephole, already preparing his polite rejection. The face on the other side stopped him cold. It was a woman. Dark hair, damp with melting snow. High cheekbones and a sharp jaw that he recognized from the portrait hanging in the lobby of the Vance Industries headquarters. Eyes that commanded boardrooms and terrified executives and had appeared on the cover of Forbes magazine twice in the past 5 years. Camilla Vance, his CEO, the founder's daughter, the most powerful woman in the Pacific Northwest, maybe the entire West Coast. She was standing at his door. At 11:47 p.m., on Christmas night, holding a paper bag from an all-night deli, looking nothing like the untouchable titan he'd glimpsed at company town halls and quarterly reviews. She looked nervous, human, almost as lost as he felt. Evan stared through the peephole for a long moment, convinced that the beer had been stronger than he thought. This was a hallucination, a fever dream, a cosmic prank that the universe was playing on him. Then Camilla Vance shifted her weight from one foot to the other and glanced down the empty hallway, and he saw something that made his breath catch: uncertainty. Raw, naked uncertainty. The kind that didn't belong on the face of a woman who reportedly fired her last 3 VPs without blinking. She wasn't sure he would open the door. Evan's hand moved to the deadbolt before his brain could talk him out of it. The door swung open, and Camilla Vance looked up at him with an expression that sat somewhere between relief and terror. Up close, she was different than he'd imagined. Smaller, somehow, without the power suits and the boardroom lighting. More fragile. There were shadows under her eyes that makeup had tried and failed to hide, and the designer coat she wore was rumpled, like she'd been driving for hours. "Mr. Hart," she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands, one clutching the paper bag, the other pressed flat against her coat pocket, were shaking. "Evan, I apologize for the intrusion." Evan opened his mouth to respond and found that no words came out. "What did you say to your CEO when she showed up at your door on Christmas night? What social protocol covered this particular situation?" "I should explain," Camilla continued, rushing to fill the silence. "This isn't... I'm not..." She stopped, took a breath, and seemed to gather herself. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I learned that you were spending Christmas alone. I couldn't stop thinking about it." Evan blinked. "You? What?" "HR sends me reports, overtime sign-ups, holiday schedules, that sort of thing. Normally I just glance at them, but this year..." She trailed off, looking past him into the dim apartment. "This year, your name caught my attention." "My name?" "You've worked for Vance Industries for 7 years. You've never taken a vacation day during the holidays, never called in sick. And when I asked around, discreetly, I learned that you live alone, that your daughter is with her grandparents, and that you signed up for every overtime shift this week." Her gaze returned to his, and there was something raw in it. I wondered." She stopped again. The paper bag crinkled in her grip. Evan should have been confused. He should have been suspicious, or alarmed, or at least deeply curious about why a billionaire CEO was standing in his hallway with fast food at midnight. But instead, all he felt was a strange recognition, like looking in a mirror and seeing someone else's reflection. "Ms. Vance," he said slowly, "it's freezing out there." She nodded, and he thought he saw her shoulders relax slightly. "Would you like to come in?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they didn't know about each other and everything they were about to find out. Camilla hesitated for just a moment, her eyes searching his face for something he couldn't name. Then she stepped across the threshold, and Christmas night cracked open like an egg, revealing something neither of them had expected to find inside. Evan closed the door behind her and leaned against it, watching as Camilla Vance, surveyed his modest living room. He tried to see it through her eyes. The second-hand couch with its sagging cushions, the coffee table scarred with water rings, the Christmas tree that looked even sadder under her scrutiny. "It's not much," he heard himself say. "I wasn't expecting company." Camilla shook her head slowly, her attention fixed on the row of photographs on the bookshelf. "It's warm," she said quietly. "It feels like someone lives here." The comment was strange, but before Evan could ask what she meant, she turned and held out the paper bag. "I brought sandwiches. From that deli on Morrison, the one that never closes. I wasn't sure what you liked, so I got several kinds." A pause. "I wasn't sure you'd let me in." Evan took the bag automatically, his brain still several steps behind the conversation. "Ms. Vance." "Camilla, please." She pulled off her snow-damp coat and draped it over the arm of the couch with the casual ease of someone who was used to having her things taken care of. Then she seemed to realize where she was, and the ease disappeared. She looked at her coat, then at Evan, then at the closet door beside the entrance. "I can hang that up," Evan offered. No, it's fine. I'm sorry. I'm not usually this." She made a vague gesture that seemed to encompass the entire situation. "I shouldn't have come. This was a mistake." She reached for her coat, and Evan surprised himself by stepping forward. "You showed up at my door at midnight on Christmas with sandwiches," he said. "You drove across Portland in a snowstorm to check on an employee you've probably never spoken to before. I don't know why you're here, Ms. Camilla, but I'm pretty sure it's not a mistake." Camilla's hand stopped, hovering over her coat. She looked at him, really looked at him, and Evan felt the weight of her attention like a physical thing. This was a woman who negotiated billion-dollar deals, who testified before congressional committees, who had reportedly made a venture capitalist cry in a shareholder meeting. Her gaze was penetrating, analytical, accustomed to stripping away pretense and finding the weakness beneath. But when she looked at Evan, she didn't seem to be searching for weakness. She seemed to be searching for something else entirely. "You're different than I expected," she said finally. "Different how?" "I'm not sure yet." She withdrew her hand from the coat. "Is that offer of tea still open?" Evan wasn't sure he'd made an offer of tea, but he nodded anyway and led her to the kitchen. He filled the kettle and set it on the stove while Camilla settled into one of the mismatched chairs at his small table. She looked out of place there, like a sculpture in a hardware store, but she didn't seem to mind. Her hands, no longer shaking, rested flat on the tabletop. 7 years, she said as the kettle began to hiss. "You've been with the company for 7 years, and I don't think we've ever spoken directly." "You have 3,000 employees," Evan pointed out. "I don't take it personally." "Maybe you should." She traced a scratch in the table's surface with her fingernail. "I used to know everyone at Vance Industries. When my father ran it, back when it was still small enough to fit in a single warehouse, I knew every name, every birthday, every family crisis." She paused. "Now I don't even know the people who work on my own floor." The kettle whistled. Evan poured the water over 2 tea bags, the cheap supermarket kind, but Camilla didn't comment, and set the mugs on the table. He opened the paper bag she'd brought and found 4 different sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, along with packets of mustard and mayonnaise and a container of something that looked like coleslaw. "I didn't know what you'd want," Camilla said again, and there was something almost apologetic in her voice. Evan divided the sandwiches between them and sat down. The whole situation still felt surreal, like a scene from a movie he hadn't auditioned for. But Camilla was making an effort, an awkward, uncertain effort that seemed utterly foreign to her usual public persona, and the least he could do was meet her halfway. "Why are you really here?" he asked. Camilla picked up her tea and blew on it, the steam curling around her face. "I told you, I learned you were alone and you couldn't stop thinking about it. I heard you, but that doesn't explain why." Evan leaned back in his chair. "You must have hundreds of employees spending Christmas alone. You didn't show up at their doors." For a long moment, Camilla didn't answer. She sipped her tea, her expression distant, and Evan thought she might deflect again, give him some corporate non-answer that sounded meaningful but said nothing. Instead, she set down her mug and met his eyes. "Do you know where I was supposed to be tonight?" Evan shook his head. "I had 3 invitations: a dinner party at the mayor's mansion, a charity gala at the Nines Hotel, and a private gathering at my father's estate in the West Hills, where 40 of Portland's most influential people were waiting to network their way through the holiday." She said the words flatly, like they were describing someone else's life. "I got dressed for the gala," she continued. "I got in my car. I drove halfway there, and then I couldn't. I couldn't walk into another room full of people who smile at me because of what I can do for them. I couldn't make small talk about market projections while pretending I don't know that half of them are waiting for me to fail. So you came here instead." So I drove for 2 hours, around the city, through the snow, trying to figure out where I wanted to be. Camilla's fingers tightened around her mug. "And then I remembered your name, Evan Hart. Logistics and inventory. 7 years of loyalty and not a single request for recognition. I remembered reading your file last month, and I remembered thinking, here's someone who understands what it's like to be invisible." The words landed like a physical blow. Evan felt them in his chest, in the hollow space where his sense of self-worth used to live. "I'm not invisible," he said, and the protest sounded weak even to his own ears. "No, you're not." Camilla's gaze softened. "But you feel like you are, don't you?" The question hung between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. The Christmas tree blinked on, off, on, its rhythm steady and meaningless. Evan thought about lying. He thought about giving her the easy answer, the professional answer, that everything was fine, that he was grateful for the job, that his life was exactly what he'd chosen. But Camilla Vance had driven through a snowstorm and shown up at his door with sandwiches because she couldn't face a party full of people who wanted something from her. She'd sat at his scratched kitchen table and admitted that she'd spent Christmas night driving in circles. She'd looked at him like he was a person instead of an employee. The least he could do was tell her the truth. "I feel like I'm disappearing," Evan said. "A little bit more every day. Like I'm fading out around the edges, and soon there won't be anything left." Camilla nodded slowly, and in her eyes he saw something that looked like recognition. "How old is your daughter?" she asked. 8, 9 in March. Evan picked up his sandwich but didn't eat it. "She's the only thing that keeps me tethered. Some days, she's the only reason I get out of bed." "Tell me about her." So Evan told her. He told her about Mia's obsession with drawing, how she filled sketchbook after sketchbook with fantastical creatures and imaginary worlds. He told her about the way Mia laughed, full body, uncontrollable, like joy was a physical force that possessed her. He told her about the tooth fairy negotiations, and the made-up songs, and the time Mia had tried to teach their elderly neighbor's cat to do tricks. But he also told her the other things, the things he hadn't said out loud in months, maybe years. He told her about the divorce, how it had felt like drowning, slow and inevitable and entirely his fault. How Sarah had been right about everything. He'd used work to hide from his family, and by the time he realized what he was losing, it was already gone. He told her about Sarah's death, the phone call that had made the world go silent. The weeks afterward, when he'd had to hold it together for Mia's sake, even though he was falling apart inside. He told her about the Hendersons, the custody fight, the way they looked at his apartment like it was a crime scene, the way Mia came back from their house with new clothes and new toys and a vague dissatisfaction that she couldn't articulate but he could feel. "She's slipping away from me," Evan said. His voice had grown rough, and he realized with a distant sort of embarrassment that his eyes were stinging. "Every time I see her, she feels a little farther away, and I don't know how to reach her. I don't know if I even have the right to try." Camilla had been silent throughout his confession, her tea forgotten, her attention completely fixed on him. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and startling, and something else, something human in a way that surprised them both. "You're not failing," she said quietly. "You're surviving. There's a difference." Evan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, it all looks the same." "I know." Camilla withdrew her hand, and for a moment her composure cracked. What lay beneath it was exhaustion, profound, bone-deep exhaustion that mirrored his own. I know exactly what you mean. She picked up her sandwich and took a bite, chewing slowly, as if she were gathering herself for something difficult. When she spoke again, her voice was different, smaller, like a door had opened somewhere inside her and she was allowing him to look through. I have a house in the West Hills, she said, 6,000 square feet, 7 bedrooms, a home theater, a wine cellar, an infinity pool that overlooks the entire city. She set down the sandwich. I've lived there for 11 years, and in all that time I've never once had someone visit who wasn't there for business. Evan waited. My father thinks I'm cold, calculating. He tells people I was born without the capacity for emotional attachment. A bitter smile crossed her face. He says it like a compliment, like it's an advantage in business. And maybe it was, once. Maybe being unable to connect made me a better CEO. Made you? I'm not sure anymore. She turned the mug in her hands, watching the tea swirl. Last year, my assistant had a baby. She was with me for 9 years, knew my schedule better than I did, anticipated every need before I voiced it. And when she went on maternity leave, I realized I didn't know her daughter's name. I didn't know if she had other children. I didn't know anything about her life outside those office walls. That's not unusual. Most people don't. I'd been to her wedding, Evan. Camilla's eyes met his. I gave a toast. I don't remember any of it. I was thinking about a shareholder lawsuit the entire time. And when her maternity leave ended, she didn't come back. She sent a letter, very polite, very professional. She said she'd realized she wanted to be present for her family, and that working for me had taught her what absence looked like. The silence that followed was heavy with things unsaid. Evan thought about all the holidays he'd missed, all the school plays and parent-teacher conferences he'd rescheduled, all the times Mia had asked if he'd be home for dinner, and he'd said probably not. We're the same, he said softly. Aren't we? Camilla nodded. 2 different kinds of broken, same result. You could change it. Evan wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe because she'd come here. Maybe because she'd listened. Maybe because hope was a stubborn thing that wouldn't die no matter how many times you tried to kill it. You have resources. Freedom. You could rebuild your life any way you wanted. And what would I rebuild it into? Camilla set down her mug with a sharp click. I don't know how to have friends, Evan. I don't know how to make small talk that isn't about quarterly earnings or market share. I've spent 43 years becoming excellent at exactly one thing, and that thing is running a company. Outside of that, she shook her head. Outside of that, I'm no one. That's not true, isn't it? Right now, this conversation, this is the longest non-work interaction I've had in months, possibly years. She laughed, but it was hollow. You're the first person who's looked at me like I'm a human being since... I honestly can't remember. Evan didn't know what to say to that. He thought about all the times he'd seen her picture in the company newsletter or watched her speak at town halls from the back of the auditorium. She'd always seemed untouchable, larger than life, a figure more than a person. But sitting here in his tiny kitchen with cheap tea growing cold between them, she was just a woman. A lonely, exhausted woman who had driven through a snowstorm because she couldn't stand the alternative. For what it's worth, Evan said, you seem pretty human to me. Camilla looked at him for a long moment. Then for the first time since she'd arrived, she smiled. A real smile, small and uncertain and somehow more beautiful than any of her practiced boardroom expressions. Thank you, she said. You have no idea what that means. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, and Christmas Day ended without either of them noticing. They sat in the kitchen and talked, sandwiches half-eaten, tea gone cold, while snow continued to fall outside the window. They talked about childhood and disappointment, about dreams that had calcified into obligations, about the 1,000 tiny choices that had led them to this moment. Evan told her about his father, a factory worker who'd died of a heart attack at 52, worn down by decades of overtime and stress. He told her about the promise he'd made to himself then, that he would provide for his family without sacrificing his health, that he would be present, that he would do better. I broke that promise, he admitted, every single piece of it. Promises to ourselves are the easiest ones to break, Camilla said. There's no one to hold us accountable. She told him about her mother, who had died when Camilla was 16. Brain aneurysm, sudden and senseless. She told him about her father's response, throwing himself into work, building Vance Industries into an empire, measuring love in stock prices and acquisition deals. I learned from him, she said. Too well, maybe. I learned that feelings are vulnerabilities, and vulnerabilities get exploited. I learned that the only safe place is the top, and the only way to stay there is to never need anyone. That sounds exhausting. It is. She rubbed her eyes, and for a moment she looked decades older. It's the most exhausting thing I've ever done, and I'm not sure I can keep doing it. The admission hung in the air between them, dangerous and raw. Evan understood, instinctively, that she hadn't meant to say it, that it had slipped out in the quiet intimacy of the hour, carried by the strange alchemy of two strangers discovering they weren't so strange after all. He didn't push. He didn't ask what she meant or what she planned to do about it. Instead, he got up and refilled the kettle, made 2 fresh mugs of tea, and brought one back to her without a word. Camilla accepted it with a look that said more than any thank you could have. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the ticking of the clock and the whisper of snow against the window. It was, Evan realized, the first comfortable silence he'd experienced in years. Usually, silence felt like accusation, like proof of his inadequacy, his inability to fill space with anything meaningful. But this silence felt different, like rest, like 2 people who didn't need to perform for each other. "Can I tell you something?" Camilla asked eventually. Evan nodded. "The real reason I remembered your name." She wrapped her hands around the warm mug, as if drawing courage from it. "It wasn't just the overtime records. It was something that happened 3 years ago, something I saw." Evan frowned. He couldn't imagine what she might have seen. What moment from his unremarkable career could have stuck in the memory of someone like her? "We were reorganizing the distribution center," Camilla continued, "cutting staff. You know how it goes. Efficiency experts, performance metrics, eliminating redundancies." Her mouth twisted. Corporate euphemisms for destroying people's lives. Evan remembered that time. Half his team had been laid off in a single afternoon. He'd spent weeks afterward picking up the slack, working doubles to cover for people who weren't there anymore. There was a young man, new hire, barely out of training. He was on the list to be let go, and he came to you crying, terrified. He had a baby at home and a wife who'd just lost her own job, and he was begging you to help him. The memory surfaced in Evan's mind, hazy but present. Jason something. 23 years old with a face full of acne and a wedding ring he kept twisting around his finger. "I was in the distribution center that day," Camilla said, "observing. No one knew I was there. I'd come in through the back, wanted to see how the layoffs were being handled, and I watched you sit down with that young man for 2 hours. You went through his work with him, showed him how to improve his numbers, helped him prepare a case for his supervisor, and then you advocated for him. You went to HR personally and argued that he deserved another chance." Evan remembered. He also remembered that it hadn't worked, that Jason had been laid off anyway, one of the faceless casualties of corporate restructuring. "They fired him," Evan said. "My advocacy didn't mean anything." "That's not true." Camilla's voice was firm. "He found another job 2 months later at one of our competitors. Better position, better pay. He sent a letter to the company, addressed to me personally, thanking Vance Industries for giving him the push he needed to find something better." She paused. "But mostly, he thanked you, by name. He said you were the first person in his professional life who had treated him like he mattered." Evan stared at her. He'd never received any follow-up about Jason, never known what happened to him after the layoff. He'd assumed, as he always assumed, that his efforts had been pointless, a small kindness in a system that didn't value kindness. "That letter sat on my desk for a week," Camilla said. "I read it every day, and I kept thinking, who is this Evan Hart? Who is this person who takes time he doesn't have to help someone he barely knows, when the entire company is telling him it doesn't matter? I just did what anyone would do." "No," Camilla shook her head slowly. "You did what almost no one does. You saw a person where everyone else saw a head count. You invested in his dignity when it would have been easier and smarter from a self-preservation standpoint to keep your head down and protect your own position." She set down her mug and leaned forward, and there was something fierce in her eyes now, something that looked almost like hope. That's why I'm here, Evan. That's why I couldn't get your name out of my head. Because I've built an empire on efficiency and optimization and shareholder value, and I've forgotten what it means to treat people like they matter. And somewhere along the way, I started to suspect that everything I've achieved is worthless. The words landed in the space between them, heavy and honest and unguarded. I came here tonight because I needed to be reminded that kindness exists, Camilla said. That there are people in this world who give without expecting anything in return. I needed to remember what humanity looks like. She held his gaze. And I found it in the one employee who didn't want anything from me. Evan felt the weight of her confession settle into his chest. He thought about all the ways he'd judged himself over the years, all the ways he'd failed to measure up to his own expectations. He thought about the father he'd wanted to be, the husband he'd promised to become, the man he'd imagined he would grow into. And then he thought about Jason, the young man he'd helped 3 years ago, about the small kindness he'd offered without expecting it to matter. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was what humanity looked like. Not grand gestures or perfect lives, but small moments of connection in a world that too often forgot they mattered. I don't know what to say, Evan admitted. You don't have to say anything. Camilla smiled again, and this time it reached her eyes. You've already shown me what I needed to see. The snow had stopped falling sometime in the last hour, and the first gray light of dawn was beginning to seep through the kitchen window. They'd been talking all night, Evan realized, nearly 5 hours of conversation that had felt like minutes. He should have been exhausted. Instead, he felt strangely awake, as if something had shifted inside him without his noticing. What happens now? He asked. Camilla looked at him for a long moment. Then she stood, retrieving her coat from the couch, her movements careful and deliberate. Now I have a lot of thinking to do, she said. About the company, about my life, about what kind of person I want to be. She paused at the door and turned back to face him. But I have a feeling this isn't the last time we'll talk, Evan Hart. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even a plan. But standing in his small kitchen, watching Camilla Vance pull on her coat and prepare to walk back into a world that expected her to be invulnerable, Evan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not the desperate, grasping hope that had sustained him through the worst of his divorce and Sarah's death. This was quieter, steadier. The kind of hope that came from being seen, truly seen, by another person who understood what it meant to be broken. Merry Christmas, Evan, Camilla said softly. Merry Christmas, Camilla. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Cold air rushed in, sharp and clean, carrying the smell of fresh snow and possibility. Then she was gone. Her footsteps fading down the corridor, and Evan was left alone in his apartment with the blinking tree and the dawn light and the strange, unexpected gift of a human connection. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if he would see Camilla again, or if this night would fade into memory like so many other moments of fleeting connection. But as he turned back to his kitchen table, he saw the remnants of their shared meal, the sandwich wrappers and the cold tea and the chair where she'd sat. And he knew that something had changed. He had been seen. He had been heard. For one night, in a tiny apartment in Portland, 2 people had stopped pretending they were fine and had told each other the truth. And sometimes, that was the beginning of everything. The morning after Camilla left, Evan stood at his window and watched the sun rise over a city transformed by snow. Portland gleamed white and silent, the streets empty except for a few early risers walking dogs or scraping ice from windshields. It looked like a postcard, the kind of perfect winter scene that belonged on Christmas cards sent between people who actually had something to celebrate. He hadn't slept. After Camilla walked out his door, he'd sat at the kitchen table for another hour, replaying their conversation in his head, trying to convince himself it had really happened. Then he'd cleaned the mugs and thrown away the sandwich wrappers and straightened the chairs, as if erasing the physical evidence might help him make sense of the emotional aftermath. It didn't. His phone buzzed on the counter, and Evan crossed the room to check it. A text from Margaret Henderson. Mia had a wonderful Christmas. She's asking when you'll pick her up. Let us know if you need to adjust the schedule. The message was polite, even warm, but Evan could read the subtext beneath it. Let us know if you need to adjust meant, Let us know if you're too busy, too tired, too unreliable. It meant we're happy to keep her longer if you can't handle it. He typed back quickly. I'll be there at noon as planned. Thank you for having her. Then he set down the phone and went to take a shower, turning the water as hot as he could stand it, letting the steam fill his lungs and the heat work into his exhausted muscles. The drive to Lake Oswego would take 45 minutes in good weather, longer with the snow. He needed to be sharp. He needed to be present. He needed to show Mia and the Hendersons that he was capable of being the father she deserved. But as the water ran down his back, his mind kept drifting back to Camilla. To the look on her face when she'd admitted she couldn't name a single person who would notice if she disappeared. To the way her hand had felt when she'd reached across the table and touched his. Warm and unexpected and achingly human. She'd called him kind. She'd said he'd reminded her what humanity looked like. Evan turned off the water and stood dripping in the steam, staring at the cracked tiles of his shower wall. He didn't feel kind. He felt tired and broken and barely held together. He felt like a man who had spent years failing at everything that mattered and had somehow stumbled into a moment of grace he didn't deserve. But maybe that was the point. Maybe grace wasn't something you earned. Maybe it was something that showed up at your door at midnight, carrying sandwiches and searching for connection. He dried off and dressed in his cleanest clothes, a button-down shirt that was only slightly wrinkled, khakis that still held a crease. He wanted to look respectable when he picked up Mia. He wanted the Hendersons to see him and think, he's trying, he's doing his best. The drive to Lake Oswego was slower than he'd expected. The plows had been out, but the side streets were still slick, and Evan took his time, navigating carefully through neighborhoods that grew progressively more affluent as he left the city behind. The houses got bigger. The lawns got wider. The Christmas decorations shifted from inflatable Santas to tasteful wreaths and professionally installed light displays. The Henderson estate sat at the end of a cul-de-sac behind a wrought iron gate that opened automatically when Evan pulled up. He'd been here dozens of times, but the sight still made his stomach clench. The house was enormous, a sprawling Tudor revival with ivy climbing the walls and a circular driveway that could have held 20 cars. There was a fountain in the center of the lawn, turned off for winter but still imposing, and a row of perfectly trimmed hedges that probably cost more to maintain than Evan's monthly rent. He parked his aging Honda behind Margaret's Mercedes and sat for a moment, gathering himself. Then he climbed out of the car and walked to the front door, his boots crunching on the salted walkway. The door opened before he could knock. Evan? Margaret Henderson stood in the doorway, dressed in cream-colored cashmere, her silver hair swept back in an elegant chignon. She was smiling, but the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Right on time. Come in, come in. He stepped into the foyer, which was warm and smelled of pine and cinnamon. The Christmas tree in the corner was at least 12 feet tall, decorated with coordinated ornaments and professionally wrapped presents. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers, and somewhere in the house, Evan could hear children laughing. Mia's in the game room with her cousins, Margaret said, leading him deeper into the house. They've been playing with that virtual reality set Richard bought. I swear, I don't understand any of it, but the children seem to love it. That's great, Evan managed. I'm glad she had a good time. Oh, she did. She always does. Margaret paused at the entrance to a sunlit room filled with leather furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows. Evan, before you go up, I wanted to speak with you about something. Here it comes, Evan thought. The lecture about his apartment, or his job, or his apparent inability to provide Mia with virtual reality sets and 12-foot Christmas trees. But Margaret surprised him. She gestured to a pair of armchairs by the window and sat down, crossing her ankles in that practiced way that wealthy women seem to learn in finishing school. Evan lowered himself into the chair across from her, his hands clasped between his knees. Mia told me something yesterday, Margaret said. About your gift. Evan felt his chest tighten. The art supplies. The handmade card. He'd been half dreading this moment since he'd sent them along with Mia 3 days ago. She said you drew her a picture, Margaret continued, of the two of you at the beach. She said you spent a long time on it. I'm not much of an artist, Evan admitted, but I thought... She cried, Evan. The words hit him like a punch. She cried. Happy tears. Margaret's expression softened in a way he'd never seen before. She held that card for 20 minutes, wouldn't let anyone else touch it. She told me it was the best present she'd ever received. Evan stared at her, unable to speak. He'd been so sure Mia had been disappointed, that his simple gift had paled in comparison to the iPad and the designer clothes and the dollhouse bigger than his bathroom. "I owe you an apology," Margaret said quietly. "I haven't always been fair to you. After Sarah died, well, we were all grieving, and perhaps I channeled my grief into criticism instead of support. Margaret, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." She held up a hand. "You're a good father, Evan. I don't say that often enough. You work too hard and you're stretched too thin, but you love that girl with everything you have. I see it, Richard sees it, and most importantly, Mia sees it." The tears came without warning, burning in Evan's eyes and spilling down his cheeks before he could stop them. He ducked his head, embarrassed, and felt Margaret's hand land gently on his arm. "Go get your daughter," she said. "Take her home. And Evan, call us if you need help. Not because we think you can't handle it, but because families should support each other." He looked up at her, this woman who had spent 3 years making him feel inadequate, and saw something in her eyes that looked like regret, like she was offering him a peace treaty, and all he had to do was accept it. "Thank you," he managed. "That means more than you know." Mia was waiting for him at the top of the stairs, her overnight bag already packed, her face splitting into a grin the moment she saw him. "Daddy!" She launched herself down the stairs and into his arms, and Evan caught her, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a circle while she squealed with delight. She was getting too big for this, almost too heavy for him to hold, but he didn't care. He held her tight and breathed in the smell of her shampoo and felt the broken pieces of his heart shift into something closer to whole. "I missed you, Bug," he murmured into her hair. "I missed you too, Daddy." She pulled back to look at him, her brown eyes serious. "Did you have a good Christmas?" The question caught him off guard. He thought about the empty apartment, the cheap tree, the midnight knock that had changed everything. He thought about Camilla Vance sitting at his kitchen table, telling him he was kind. "Yeah," he said, surprising himself with the truth of it. "I think I did." The drive back to Portland was different than the drive out. Mia chattered the whole way, telling him about her cousins and the virtual reality games and the cookies they'd baked with the private chef. But she also asked about his Christmas, genuinely curious, and Evan found himself telling her an edited version of the truth. "I had a visitor," he said. "Someone from work. We talked for a long time." "On Christmas?" Mia's eyes went wide. "That's sad." Actually, it wasn't sad at all. It was nice. Unexpected. Like a Christmas miracle? Evan smiled at her in the rearview mirror. "Maybe. Something like that." When they got back to the apartment, Mia immediately claimed the couch and demanded a movie marathon. They watched 2 animated films back to back while eating popcorn for dinner, something Evan would never admit to the Hendersons. And by the time the credits rolled on the second movie, Mia was asleep with her head in his lap, her breathing slow and even. He sat there for a long time, his hand resting on her hair, thinking about everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. About loneliness and connection and the strange ways people found each other in the dark. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Evan fished it out carefully, trying not to wake Mia, and saw a text from a number he didn't recognize. "I hope you're enjoying your evening with your daughter. Thank you for last night." "See." Evan stared at the message for a full minute before responding. "Thank you for the sandwiches and the conversation. I hope you're not alone." The reply came almost immediately. "I'm at my father's house, surrounded by 40 people. Never felt more alone in my life." He could hear the wry humor beneath the words, the self-aware sadness. He thought about what she'd said last night, about building an empire and forgetting what it meant to be human. "Find one person," he typed. "Just one. Tell them something real." A long pause. Then, "Is that what you did with me?" "Yes?" And it helped. Another pause, longer this time, then, "Good night, Evan." "Good night, Camilla." He set down the phone and looked at his daughter, still sleeping in his lap, and felt something shift in his chest. A door opening. A light turning on. For the first time in years, he fell asleep without dreading the morning. The week between Christmas and New Year's passed in a blur of overtime shifts and stolen moments with Mia. Evan worked the holiday schedule he'd signed up for, grateful now for the extra hours that would help pay down his credit card and fund the repairs his car desperately needed. But he also found himself paying attention differently, noticing the people around him in ways he hadn't before. There was Maria in shipping, who always worked holidays because her husband's nursing home care wasn't cheap. There was Devin in receiving, barely 20 years old, supporting his mother and 3 younger siblings on a warehouse salary. There was Patricia in HR, who spent her lunch breaks calling her estranged daughter in California, hoping this time she'd pick up. Evan had worked alongside these people for years without really seeing them. Now he saw them, and what he saw broke his heart. The warehouse was full of people like him. People stretched too thin, working too hard, holding their lives together with determination and duct tape. People who smiled and said, "I'm fine," when anyone asked, because admitting the truth felt too dangerous. He thought about Camilla's confession, about building a company on efficiency and optimization, while forgetting that the numbers on spreadsheets were actually human beings with families and fears and dreams that had nothing to do with quarterly earnings. On New Year's Eve, Evan took Mia to watch fireworks over the waterfront. They stood in the crowd, bundled in coats and scarves, and when midnight struck and the sky exploded in color, Mia grabbed his hand and squeezed. "Make a wish, Daddy," she said. Evan closed his eyes and wished, not for money or success or recognition, but for something simpler. He wished for courage, the courage to change his life, and the wisdom to know how. When he opened his eyes, the fireworks were still blazing, and Mia was looking up at him with a smile that made every struggle worth it. "Happy New Year, Bug." "Happy New Year, Daddy." He didn't hear from Camilla again for 2 weeks. Part of him wondered if he'd imagined the whole thing, if the midnight visit and the text messages had been some elaborate dream his lonely brain had conjured. But then, on the second Monday of January, his supervisor called him into the office. Martinez was a good man, fair, hardworking, the kind of boss who remembered birthdays and asked about your kids. He'd been running the distribution center for 15 years, and he treated his team like family. "Evan, have a seat," Martinez said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "How was your holiday?" "Good," Evan said carefully. "Quiet. Got some quality time with Mia." "That's good. That's important." Martinez shuffled some papers on his desk, a nervous habit that Evan had learned to recognize. "Listen, something's come up. I'm not sure how to tell you this, so I'm just going to say it." Evan's stomach dropped. He'd been through enough company restructurings to know what that preamble meant. Layoffs, position eliminations, corporate euphemisms for destroying people's lives. "Am I being let go?" "What?" "No." Martinez looked genuinely surprised. "No, nothing like that. Actually, it's the opposite." He picked up a folder and handed it across the desk. "This came down from the executive office this morning. Apparently, there's a new position being created, and you've been personally requested for it." Evan opened the folder and scanned the first page. The words blurred together at first. Employee Wellness Coordinator, Operations Support Specialist, competitive salary. But then they sharpened into focus, and he felt his breath catch in his chest. "This is a corporate position," he said slowly. "Yep," reporting directly to the CEO's office. Martinez leaned back in his chair, studying Evan with undisguised curiosity. "I don't know what you did to get on Camilla Vance's radar, but whatever it was, it must have been something. People don't get pulled from the warehouse to the executive floor. There must be some mistake." "That's what I said." Martinez smiled. "Then I got a call from Ms. Vance herself. And let me tell you, that woman doesn't make mistakes." Evan stared at the papers in his hands. The job description was detailed, comprehensive, almost as if someone had designed it specifically around his skills and circumstances. Flexible hours, parent-friendly scheduling, a salary that was nearly double what he currently made. "She wants you to start next week," Martinez continued. "There's an orientation on Monday, then a meeting with her on Tuesday to discuss the specifics." He paused. "Evan, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," Evan heard himself say. "I'm just processing." "Take your time, but not too much time. Apparently this is priority, whatever that means." Evan nodded and stood, the folder clutched in his hands like a life preserver. He walked out of Martinez's office and through the warehouse floor, past Maria and Devin and Patricia, past all the people who were holding their lives together with the same desperate determination he'd felt for so long. And for the first time in years, he felt something other than exhaustion. He felt hope. That night, after Mia was in bed, Evan sat at his kitchen table and spread the job offer across the surface. He read every word 3 times, looking for the catch, the fine print, the reason this couldn't be real. There wasn't one. The position was legitimate, the salary was real, and at the bottom of the last page, in elegant handwriting, was a note that made his eyes sting. You showed me what humanity looks like. Let me show you what it can build. See, he picked up his phone and dialed the number she'd texted from 2 weeks ago. It rang twice before she answered. Evan. Her voice was warm but professional, the voice of someone who'd been expecting this call. I assume you received the offer. I did. He looked down at the papers, at her handwritten note. I don't understand why. I thought I explained it on Christmas. You told me I was kind. You didn't tell me you were going to offer me a job. A soft laugh came through the phone. I didn't know I was going to offer you a job. Not then, but after you left. She stopped, corrected herself. After I left your apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about disappearing, about the people in the company who are stretched too thin, working too hard, holding their lives together with nothing but determination. I didn't say that. Not in those words, but you lived it. You showed me what it looks like from the inside. Camilla's voice grew serious. I've spent years looking at numbers, Evan. Productivity metrics and efficiency reports and quarterly earnings. I forgot that behind every number is a person, a family, a story. Evan closed his eyes, remembering Maria and Devin and Patricia, remembering all the faces he'd walked past for years without truly seeing. This position, Camilla continued, is about changing that. I want to build a company that treats people like human beings instead of head counts. I want flexible scheduling for parents, mental health resources that actually work, a culture that values presence over performance. That's a big change. Yes, and I can't do it alone. There was a vulnerability in her voice now, the same vulnerability he'd heard on Christmas night. I need someone who understands what it's like on the ground, someone who knows what people actually need, not just what management thinks they need, someone I can trust. And you trust me? You sat with a crying 23-year-old and helped him salvage his dignity, even though it would have been easier to look away. Yes, Evan, I trust you. The words settled into him like warmth, like the first rays of sun after a long winter. He thought about everything she was offering, not just a job, but a chance to make a difference, a chance to help people like himself, like Maria and Devin and Patricia, a chance to build something meaningful. I have conditions, he said. Name them. I need to be home by 6 every night. Mia's my priority. Done. I need to be able to speak honestly, even when you don't want to hear it. I'm counting on it. And I need you to promise me something. Evan took a breath. Promise me this isn't just a corporate initiative that looks good in press releases. Promise me you actually care about making things better. There was a long pause. When Camilla spoke again, her voice was quiet. Christmas night. I drove around Portland for 2 hours trying to find somewhere I belonged. I ended up at your door because I couldn't think of anywhere else to go. Another pause. I'm 43 years old, Evan. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. And until I sat in your kitchen and talked to you about real things, I had forgotten what it felt like to be human. She took a shaky breath. I'm not doing this for press releases. I'm doing this because I want to be the kind of person who deserves to be alive. Does that answer your question? Evan felt tears prick at his eyes. Yeah, he said softly. That answers it. So you'll take the job? He looked around his small apartment, the water stains on the ceiling, the radiator that clanked, the cheap Christmas tree he still hadn't taken down. Then he looked at the papers on his table, at the future Camilla was offering him. Yes, he said. I'll take the job. The first day of his new position was a blur of orientations and introductions, of conference rooms and coffee machines and faces he struggled to remember. The executive floor of Vance Industries was a different world from the warehouse, All glass walls and designer furniture and people who walked with purpose and spoke in acronyms Evan didn't understand. But Camilla had thought of that too. She'd assigned him a mentor, a senior operations manager named Helen Chen, who walked him through everything with patient, methodical care. Helen had been with the company for 20 years and had seen every trend and restructuring and management fad come and go. She was pragmatic and unflappable, and Evan liked her immediately. "Don't try to learn everything at once," Helen advised him over lunch in the executive cafeteria. "This place can be overwhelming, especially if you're not used to the politics. Just focus on what you're here to do and let the rest sort itself out." "What am I here to do exactly?" Evan asked. "I know the job title, but..." Helen smiled. "You're here to remind us that the people in our warehouses and offices are human beings. You're here to ask the questions that no one else thinks to ask." She stirred her tea thoughtfully. "Camilla Vance doesn't do anything without a reason, Evan. If she pulled you from the distribution center and put you on the executive floor, it's because she sees something in you that most people miss." "What do you think she sees?" "Honesty, probably. Compassion. The ability to look at a system and see its impact on real people instead of just its efficiency metrics." Helen shrugged. "Those qualities are rarer than you'd think around here." The meeting with Camilla came on Tuesday afternoon. Evan had spent the morning preparing, reviewing the job description, making notes about his ideas, trying to anticipate her questions. But when he walked into her office and saw her sitting behind a massive desk covered with papers and monitors, all his preparation evaporated. She looked different here, more polished, more professional, every inch the powerful CEO he'd seen in company newsletters and magazine covers. But when she looked up and saw him, her smile was the same one she'd worn in his kitchen, warm and real and just a little uncertain. "Evan, come in. Sit down." She gestured to a chair across from her desk. "How's your first week going?" "Overwhelming," he admitted. "But good. Helen's been helpful." "Helen's the best. I specifically asked her to work with you because I knew you'd need someone who could cut through the corporate nonsense." Camilla leaned back in her chair, studying him. "How's Mia?" The question surprised him. In all his preparation, he hadn't expected her to ask about his daughter. "She's good. Happy to have me home by 6 every night." "Good. That's important." Camilla's expression softened. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about feeling invisible, about disappearing." "I said a lot of things that night." "You did, and I've been carrying them with me ever since." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the Portland skyline. "When my father built this company, he used to know every employee by name. He'd walk the warehouse floors and ask people about their families, their dreams, their struggles. He believed that a company was only as strong as the people who worked there." "What happened?" "He retired. I took over, and somewhere along the way I forgot everything he taught me." She turned to face him. "I want to rebuild that, Evan. I want to create a company where people feel seen, where working here doesn't mean sacrificing your family, or your health, or your dignity. That's going to take more than one new position." "I know. That's why I'm not just creating one position." She walked back to her desk and pulled out a folder. "This is my proposal for a company-wide initiative. Flexible scheduling, parent support programs, mental health resources, on-site childcare, a complete restructuring of how we think about work-life balance." Evan took the folder and scanned through it. The scope was enormous. Policy changes, facility renovations, training programs for managers at every level. "This is ambitious," he said. "Yes, and it's going to face resistance. The board will push back on costs. Middle management will complain about complexity. Some people will say it's not our job to take care of employees' personal lives." Camilla met his eyes. "I need someone who believes in this as much as I do. Someone who can help me fight for it." "Why me? You could hire consultants, experts, people with actual experience in this kind of thing." "I could, but consultants don't understand what it feels like to choose between overtime and your daughter's bedtime. Experts don't know what it's like to work 60 hours a week and still worry about making rent." She leaned forward. "You do. That's why I need you." Evan looked down at the folder in his hands, at the pages of plans and proposals and possibilities. He thought about Maria and Devin and Patricia, about all the people in the warehouse who were struggling the same way he had struggled. Where do we start? Camilla's smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. We start with listening. The first initiative was simple: employee listening sessions. Small groups, facilitated conversations, spaces where people could share their experiences without fear of judgment or retaliation. Evan led most of them himself, sitting in break rooms and conference rooms and empty offices, hearing stories that broke his heart and strengthened his resolve. A single mother who had been written up for leaving early when her daughter got sick at school. A father who hadn't seen his kids awake in 3 weeks because of mandatory overtime. A young woman who had postponed her wedding twice because she couldn't get time off approved. The stories were endless, and they were all versions of the same story. People who felt trapped between the demands of their jobs and the needs of their lives. People who were burning out quietly, invisibly, one missed dinner and one sleepless night at a time. Evan documented everything. He compiled reports and presented findings and pushed back against managers who tried to dismiss the concerns as just complaining. And slowly, painfully, things began to change. The first flexible scheduling pilot launched in February. It was small, just one department, just 20 employees, but the results were immediate and dramatic. Productivity went up, turnover went down. People started smiling in the hallways. Camilla presented the results to the board, and Evan sat in the back of the room, watching her fight for every policy change and budget allocation. She was formidable in those meetings, sharp and strategic and relentless in her arguments. But Evan also saw something else, a passion that went beyond business strategy, a genuine desire to do right by the people who depended on her. When the board approved an expansion of the pilot program, Camilla caught his eye across the room and smiled. It was a small moment, invisible to anyone else, but Evan felt it like a beam of light in his chest. They were doing something real, something that mattered, and for the first time in his professional life, Evan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Spring arrived in Portland with its usual mix of rain and reluctant sunshine. Mia's 9th birthday fell on a Saturday in March, and Evan threw her a party, a real party, in their small apartment with her school friends and pizza and a homemade cake that was lopsided but covered in enough frosting to hide the damage. The Hendersons came too. Margaret arrived with a professionally wrapped present and stayed to help clean up, and when she left, she hugged Evan for the first time since Sarah's funeral. "She's happy," Margaret said, glancing at Mia, who was showing off her presents to a cluster of friends. "I can see it. You're doing a good job." "I'm trying." "I know you are." She squeezed his hand. "That's all any of us can do." After the party, when the apartment was quiet and Mia was asleep with her new art supplies clutched to her chest, Evan sat on the couch and allowed himself to feel something he'd almost forgotten existed: contentment. His life wasn't perfect. The apartment was still small, the radiator still clanked, the car still needed repairs. But Mia was thriving. His job was meaningful. And he had something he hadn't had in years, a future he could believe in. His phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. "How was the party? Messy, loud, perfect?" "I'm glad. You deserve perfect moments." He smiled at the screen. "So do you." A long pause, then, "I'm working on it. Thanks to you." Evan set down the phone and looked around his apartment, at the birthday decorations still hanging from the ceiling, at the photo of him and Mia that she'd drawn and insisted on framing, at all the small evidences of a life that was slowly, finally, coming together. He thought about Christmas night, about the knock on his door that had changed everything, about a lonely CEO and a worn-out father who had found each other in the dark. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the first stars were appearing through the clouds. Evan watched them for a long time, feeling the quiet settle into his bones. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were no magic solutions, no instant transformations. Just two broken people trying to build something better, one day at a time. But sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The expansion of the flexible scheduling program brought new challenges that Evan hadn't anticipated. Success, he discovered, could be just as complicated as failure, sometimes more so. By April, 3 more departments had adopted the pilot program, and the results continued to exceed expectations. But with visibility came scrutiny, and with scrutiny came enemies. The first sign of trouble arrived in the form of a memo from the chief financial officer, a man named Gregory Stanton, who had been with Vance Industries for 2 decades and viewed every initiative through the cold lens of quarterly returns. The memo was addressed to the board of directors, with copies to Camilla and the senior leadership team, and its subject line was clinical: Cost Analysis of Employee Wellness Initiatives. Evan read it in his office, his coffee growing cold beside him, feeling the familiar knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. Stanton had compiled every expense associated with the new programs: the flexible scheduling software, the manager training sessions, the on-site childcare pilot that had just launched in the corporate headquarters. He'd calculated productivity losses during the transition periods, estimated the cost of hiring additional staff to cover flexible shifts, and projected the impact on the company's bottom line over the next 5 years. The numbers were damning if you looked at them the way Stanton wanted you to look at them. He'd isolated every cost without accounting for a single benefit. No mention of the reduced turnover that had already saved the company hundreds of thousands in recruitment and training costs. No acknowledgement of the productivity gains in departments where people actually wanted to come to work. No consideration of the intangible value of a workforce that felt respected and supported. It was a hit piece disguised as financial analysis, and Evan knew exactly what it was meant to accomplish. He printed the memo and walked to Camilla's office, where he found her standing at the window, her back to him, staring out at the city below. She didn't turn when he entered, which told him she'd already seen it. "I assume you've read Stanton's masterpiece," she said. "Just finished." Evan set the memo on her desk. "He's trying to kill the program. He's been trying to kill it since I announced it. This is just his latest attempt." Camilla finally turned, and Evan was struck by how tired she looked. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there a month ago, and a tension in her shoulders that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "The board meeting is next week. He's going to present this to them and argue that we can't afford to continue. Can we counter it? I've asked Helen to compile our own analysis, the real numbers. But Gregory has allies on the board, and they've been waiting for an excuse to push back against these initiatives." She sat down heavily in her chair. "They think I've gone soft, that I'm prioritizing feelings over finances. Have you?" The question came out sharper than Evan intended, but Camilla didn't seem offended. If anything, she seemed grateful for the directness. "No. I've seen the data. These programs are good for the company, genuinely good, in ways that show up on balance sheets if you're willing to look past the initial investment. But Gregory doesn't want to see that. He wants to see me fail." She rubbed her temples. "He was my father's protege, you know. He expected to take over the company when my father retired. Instead, he got me. He's been waiting 20 years to prove you wrong." "Something like that." Camilla looked up at him. "I won't let him destroy what we're building, Evan, but I need you to understand what we're up against. This isn't just about policy changes, it's about power and legacy and everything that makes corporate politics ugly." Evan thought about Maria in shipping, who had finally been able to attend her son's soccer games without fear of losing her job. He thought about Devin in receiving, who was taking night classes now that his schedule allowed for something other than work and sleep. He thought about all the people whose lives had quietly, incrementally improved because someone in the executive suite had decided they mattered. "Tell me what I can do," he said. Camilla's smile was tired but genuine. "Come to the board meeting. Let them see the face behind the numbers. Let them remember that we're talking about human beings, not just head counts. I'm not exactly a polished corporate speaker. That's precisely why I want you there." She stood and walked around her desk to face him. "These board members spend their lives in boardrooms, listening to people who've rehearsed every word. They've forgotten what authenticity sounds like. Show them." Evan spent the next week preparing. He gathered testimonials from employees who had benefited from the new programs, written statements and video interviews, and heartfelt letters that spoke to the real impact of flexible scheduling and mental health resources. He compiled data that Helen had assembled, charts and graphs that told the truth Stanton had tried to obscure. And he practiced his presentation, standing in his empty apartment after Mia was asleep, speaking to the walls like they were hostile board members waiting to tear him apart. The night before the meeting, he couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through worst-case scenarios in his mind. What if he stumbled over his words? What if the board dismissed him as unqualified? What if everything he and Camilla had built collapsed because he couldn't convince a room full of executives that people mattered more than profits? His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Camilla. Can't sleep either? How did you know? Because I'm standing at my window looking at the city lights, wondering if I've made a terrible mistake. A pause. Then, not about the programs. About asking you to do this. You didn't sign up to fight corporate battles. Evan sat up in bed, the sheets pooling around his waist. He thought about everything that had led him to this moment. The Christmas night knock. The conversation that had changed his life. The months of work that had followed. He thought about what Camilla had offered him. Not just a job, but a chance to make a difference. A chance to help people who were struggling the way he had struggled. I didn't sign up for it, he typed. But I'm choosing it. There's a difference. A long pause. Then, thank you, Evan, for everything. Don't thank me yet. Thank me after we win. He set down the phone and lay back against the pillows, feeling something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but something close to it. Determination, maybe. The quiet certainty that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The boardroom was everything Evan had expected and feared. Massive and intimidating, with a polished mahogany table that could seat 20 and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Portland skyline. The board members sat along both sides of the table like judges at a trial, their faces neutral, their expensive suits perfectly pressed. Gregory Stanton sat at the far end, directly across from Camilla, and Evan could feel the antagonism radiating off him like heat from a furnace. He was a tall man, silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of confident bearing that came from decades of getting his way. When he looked at Evan, his expression was politely dismissive, the look of a man who had already decided that his opponent wasn't worth taking seriously. Camilla opened the meeting with a brief overview of the wellness initiatives, her voice steady and professional. Then she turned the floor over to Stanton, who rose and launched into his presentation with the rehearsed ease of someone who had given 1,000 such presentations before. The numbers flowed like poison. Costs and projections and risk assessments, all designed to paint the wellness programs as a financial disaster waiting to happen. Stanton spoke for 20 minutes, his voice never rising above a measured calm, and by the time he finished, Evan could see doubt creeping into the faces of several board members. In conclusion, Stanton said, while I appreciate the sentiment behind these initiatives, I cannot in good conscience recommend their continuation. The financial risks are simply too great, and the potential returns too uncertain. I move that we suspend the programs pending a full review and cost-benefit analysis conducted by an independent firm. A murmur ran through the room. Several board members nodded, and Evan felt his heart sink. Then Camilla spoke. Before we vote on Gregory's motion, I'd like to introduce someone who has been instrumental in implementing these programs. Evan Hart joined us from the distribution center 6 months ago, and he's been leading our employee engagement efforts since then. I've asked him to share some perspective that I think the board needs to hear. Every eye in the room turned to Evan. He felt the weight of their scrutiny like a physical pressure, and for a moment his mind went blank. All the rehearsed words, all the careful arguments, they scattered like leaves in a wind. Then he thought about Maria, about Devin, about Patricia and HR and all the other faces he'd come to know over the past months. He thought about the letters he'd collected, the stories he'd heard, the tears he'd seen shed by people who had finally felt like their company cared about them. He stood. I'm not a corporate speaker, he began, his voice rough with nerves. I don't have Gregory's experience or his eloquence. Until 6 months ago, I worked in the warehouse, counting inventory and loading trucks. So I'm not going to stand here and argue about numbers because honestly, I'm not qualified to do that. He saw Stanton smirk slightly, as if Evan had just confirmed everything he already believed. But I'm qualified to tell you what I've seen, Evan continued. I'm qualified to tell you about Maria, who works in shipping. She's 52 years old. She's been with this company for 18 years. And until the flexible scheduling program started, she hadn't attended a single one of her son's soccer games in 3 years, not one. Because her shift ended at 6 and the game started at 5:30, and asking for time off was seen as a sign that she wasn't committed to her job. The smirk faded from Stanton's face. Maria's son is 14 now. He's been playing soccer since he was 8. That's 6 years of games, 6 years of tournaments, 6 years of moments that Maria missed because we told her, in 1,000 small ways, that her job mattered more than her family. Evan's voice steadied as he spoke, drawing strength from the truth of what he was saying. Last month, Maria came to me in tears, happy tears. She'd finally seen her son play. She watched him score a goal and she was there to cheer for him. And she told me it was the first time in years that she felt like a good mother. The room had gone silent. Evan looked at the board members, meeting their eyes one by one. I could tell you about Devin, who's taking night classes now because he finally has time. Or Patricia, who reconnected with her estranged daughter because she could take an afternoon off without losing her job. I could tell you 100 stories like that, and every single one of them would be true. But here's what I really want you to understand. He took a breath. Gregory's numbers are accurate. These programs cost money. That's true. But what Gregory's numbers don't capture is the cost of not doing this. The cost of employees who burn out and quit, taking their skills and experience with them. The cost of hiring and training replacements, over and over again. The cost of a workforce that shows up every day feeling trapped and resentful and invisible. He turned to face Stanton directly. I've worked in that warehouse for 7 years. I know what it feels like to be a number on a spreadsheet. And I can tell you that the people who feel that way, the people who feel like they don't matter, they're not giving you their best work. They're giving you just enough to survive, just enough to keep their jobs. And you might not see that cost on a quarterly report, but it's there. It's always there. Evan looked back at the board. You can vote to end these programs. That's your right. But if you do, I want you to understand what you're really ending. Not just policies and budgets, lives, families. The chance for people like Maria and Devin and Patricia to feel like human beings instead of headcounts. He sat down. His heart was pounding and his hands were shaking, but he'd said what he came to say. The silence stretched for what felt like eternity. Then, from the far end of the table, an older woman spoke. Eleanor Vance, Camilla's aunt and the largest individual shareholder in the company. Gregory, she said, her voice crisp and clear. I've reviewed your analysis, and I have a question. In all your projections of costs and risks, did you factor in the value of what Evan just described? The intangible benefits of a workforce that feels respected and supported? Stanton shifted in his chair. Those benefits are difficult to quantify. That wasn't my question. Did you factor them in at all? A pause. No. Eleanor nodded slowly. I thought not. She turned to the rest of the board. I've been on this board for 35 years. I remember when my brother built this company from nothing, and I remember what he always said, that a company is only as strong as the people who work there. We seem to have forgotten that somewhere along the way. She looked at Evan with something that might have been respect. I don't know this young man, but I know what I just heard. And I know that the things he's describing, the stories he's telling, those matter. They matter in ways that don't show up on balance sheets, but they matter nonetheless. She straightened in her chair. I move that we continue the wellness programs and allocate additional funding for their expansion. All in favor? The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. When the final hands went up, 7 board members had voted in favor, 4 against. The programs would continue. After the meeting, Camilla found Evan in the hallway outside the boardroom. She was smiling, but there were tears in her eyes. You did it, she said. We did it. Evan was still shaking, still processing what had just happened. Your aunt. I didn't expect that. Neither did I. Camilla shook her head in wonder. Eleanor hasn't spoken in a board meeting in 5 years. She just votes and leaves? I've never seen her advocate for anything. Maybe she was waiting for something worth advocating for. Camilla looked at him for a long moment, and Evan saw something in her expression that he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, certainly. But something else, too. Something deeper and more complicated. Come on, she said finally. Let me buy you lunch. We have a lot to celebrate. They went to a small restaurant near the waterfront, the kind of place that Evan never would have discovered on his own. Intimate and elegant, with white tablecloths and a wine list longer than his arm. Camilla ordered for both of them, and Evan let her, too exhausted from the morning's events to think about food. You were remarkable in there, Camilla said once the waiter had gone. I've seen seasoned executives crumble under that kind of pressure. You stood your ground and spoke from the heart. I almost didn't, Evan admitted. When I stood up, my mind went completely blank. All I could think about was how out of place I was. That's exactly why it worked. You weren't trying to be something you're not. You were just you. Honest and genuine and completely human. She smiled. The board sees polished presentations every day. They don't see truth very often. The food arrived, something French and complicated that Evan didn't recognize but that tasted incredible. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the tension of the morning slowly draining away. Can I ask you something? Evan said finally. Anything. What happens now? With Stanton, I mean. He's not going to just accept this defeat. Camilla's expression darkened slightly. No, he won't. Gregory's been waiting for years to undermine me, and this is just a setback for him. He'll regroup, find new angles of attack. She set down her fork. But that's my problem to deal with, not yours. It's our problem. We're in this together. She looked at him, and Evan saw something flicker in her eyes. Surprise, maybe, or wonder. I'm not used to that, she said quietly. Having someone who wants to share the burden. Maybe it's time to get used to it. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Neither of them was ready to examine too closely. Then the moment passed, and Camilla picked up her wine glass with a small smile. To unexpected allies, she said. Evan raised his glass. To midnight knocks. They drank, and for a moment the future seemed bright and full of possibility. But the victory in the boardroom was only the beginning. Over the following weeks, as the expanded programs rolled out across more departments, the real work began, and with it, the real challenges. Implementing change in a company the size of Vance Industries was like turning an ocean liner. Every policy adjustment required approval from multiple departments. Every new resource demanded budget negotiations and training sessions and countless meetings that seemed to accomplish nothing. And everywhere Evan turned, he encountered resistance. Sometimes open, sometimes subtle, but always present. Middle managers complained that flexible scheduling made their jobs harder. Department heads worried about productivity dips during transition periods. And there was always someone willing to whisper in the hallways that these programs were just a phase, that Camilla would eventually come to her senses and things would go back to the way they'd always been. Evan fought every battle he could. He met with skeptical managers one-on-one, listening to their concerns and working through solutions. He gathered data obsessively, building a case for the programs that grew stronger with each passing month. And he leaned on Helen Chen, whose decades of institutional knowledge helped him navigate the political minefields that lay hidden throughout the organization. But the hardest part wasn't the corporate politics. It was the personal toll. Mia noticed it first. One evening in early May, as Evan was reviewing reports at the kitchen table while she did her homework, she looked up at him with an expression he didn't recognize. Daddy, are you okay? Evan set down his pen. Of course, Bug. Why do you ask? You seem tired, and you're always looking at your phone. The words hit him like a splash of cold water. He thought about the past few weeks, the late nights, the early mornings, the constant hum of anxiety that had become so familiar he barely noticed it anymore. He'd been so focused on fighting for other people's work-life balance that he'd started to neglect his own. You're right, he said slowly. I have been working too hard. It's okay. Mia returned to her homework, her voice matter of fact. I know your job is important. I just miss you sometimes. The simple honesty of it broke something in Evan's chest. He stood up from the table, walked to his daughter, and wrapped her in a hug that she accepted with a surprised laugh. I miss you too, he said into her hair. And I'm sorry. I'm going to do better. Promise? Promise. That night, after Mia was asleep, Evan sat on the couch and thought about everything he'd learned since Christmas, about work and life and the impossible balance between them. He'd spent months helping other people find that balance, but somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of it himself. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Camilla. I need to talk to you, not about work, about something else. Her response came almost immediately. Everything okay? Yes, but I think I've been doing this wrong. A pause. Then, can you come to my house tomorrow? It's Saturday. Mia can come too. I have a pool she might enjoy. Evan stared at the message for a long moment. In all the months they'd worked together, he'd never been to Camilla's home. Their relationship, whatever it was, had stayed firmly within the boundaries of the office. Professional, focused, carefully defined. But those boundaries had been blurring for weeks now. The late-night texts, the lunches that stretched longer than they should, the moments when their eyes met across conference rooms and something unspoken passed between them. "We'd like that," he typed back. "Thank you. See you at noon." He set down the phone and looked around his small apartment, at the photographs on the shelf, the art supplies scattered across the counter, the evidence of a life that had slowly grown fuller over the past months. He thought about how far he'd come since Christmas and how far he still had to go. Change was hard. He'd known that from the beginning, but some changes were worth the struggle, and some changes were only just beginning. The drive to Camilla's house took them through neighborhoods that Mia had never seen before. Tree-lined streets with historic homes, gated communities with manicured lawns, the kind of wealth that existed in a completely different universe from their apartment in Millbrook Gardens. "Is this where your friend lives?" Mia asked from the back seat, her eyes wide as she pressed her face against the window. "My boss," Evan corrected, though the word felt wrong somehow. "Ms. Vance. Remember I told you about her? The one who came over on Christmas?" Evan had told Mia an edited version of that story, that a colleague had stopped by, that they'd had tea and talked. He hadn't mentioned who the colleague was or what their conversation had meant to him. "That's her? She must be really nice to have come over on Christmas. Most people don't do that." "No," Evan agreed quietly. "Most people don't." Camilla's house appeared at the end of a long, curved driveway, a sprawling modern estate of glass and stone, surrounded by gardens that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Evan felt a familiar flicker of inadequacy as he parked his aging Honda next to a fountain that probably cost more than his annual salary. But then the front door opened and Camilla stepped out, and everything else faded away. She was dressed differently than he'd ever seen her, casual in jeans and a simple white blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders, her feet bare against the flagstone walkway. She looked younger somehow, softer, more like the woman who'd sat in his kitchen on Christmas night than the CEO who commanded boardrooms. "You made it," she said, smiling as they climbed out of the car. "Welcome to my empty castle." Mia giggled at the description. "It's not empty. You're here." Camilla's smile widened. "That's very true. I stand corrected." She bent down to Mia's level. "You must be the famous artist I've heard so much about. Your dad showed me some of your drawings. They're incredible." Mia's face lit up with pride. "Thank you. I want to be a comic book artist when I grow up." "A noble profession. The world needs more artists." Camilla straightened and met Evan's eyes. "Come in. I'll give you the grand tour and then we can go swimming." The house was every bit as impressive inside as out. Vaulted ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows, contemporary art on the walls, furniture that looked like it belonged in a design museum. But it also felt strangely sterile, like a hotel rather than a home. There were no photographs on display, no personal touches, nothing that spoke to the life of the person who lived there. Mia, oblivious to the undercurrents, was enchanted by everything. She oohed over the home theater and gasped at the infinity pool and asked 1,000 questions that Camilla answered with patient good humor. By the time they changed into swimsuits and headed outside, she was chattering away like she'd known Camilla her whole life. Evan watched them from the edge of the pool, his heart doing something complicated in his chest. Camilla was showing Mia how to float on her back, her voice gentle and encouraging, and there was a warmth in her expression that he'd never seen in any boardroom. "She's wonderful," Camilla said later after Mia had exhausted herself swimming and fallen asleep on a lounge chair wrapped in a towel that cost more than Evan's couch. "You've raised her beautifully." "I've tried," Evan said, "but she deserves more than I can give her." "All parents feel that way." Camilla sat down beside him, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something subtle and expensive that made him think of summer evenings. "My mother used to say the same thing. She worked herself to exhaustion trying to give me opportunities, and she still felt like it wasn't enough." "What happened to her?" "She died when I was 16. Brain aneurysm. Here one day, gone the next." Camilla's voice was steady, but Evan could hear the old grief beneath it. I think that's when I decided that love was too dangerous, that caring about people only led to pain. And now? She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his breath catch: vulnerability, longing, fear. Now I'm not so sure. The words hung between them, fragile as glass. Evan felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him, the sense that they were standing at a threshold, that whatever happened next would change everything. Camilla, he began. Don't. She held up a hand, and he saw that it was trembling. Don't say anything yet. I need to tell you something first. She took a deep breath. I've been telling myself that what I feel for you is gratitude, that you helped me see things differently, and I'm just thankful. She shook her head. But that's not the truth. The truth is that I think about you constantly. The truth is that I look forward to our conversations more than anything else in my day. The truth is that I'm terrified of what I'm feeling because I've spent my entire life building walls, and you've somehow walked right through them. Evan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Camilla, I know it's complicated, she continued, the words tumbling out faster now, as if she'd been holding them back for months. I'm your boss. There are power dynamics and professional boundaries and 100 reasons why this is a terrible idea, but I can't stop feeling what I feel, and I don't know what to do about it. She looked at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. So I'm asking you to tell me the truth, whatever it is. Even if it's not what I want to hear, I need to know if I'm alone in this. Evan was silent for a long moment. He looked at Mia, still sleeping peacefully on the lounge chair, her face soft with dreams. He thought about everything he'd risked and lost over the years, his marriage, his relationship with his daughter, his sense of who he was. He thought about the walls he'd built around his own heart and how they'd crumbled bit by bit since Christmas night. You're not alone, he said finally. I feel it too. Camilla's breath caught. But you're right that it's complicated, Evan continued. I have Mia to think about. I can't just leap into something without considering what it means for her. I know. I wouldn't ask you to. And the power dynamics, they matter. I can't be seen as someone who's only where I am because of whatever this is. I understand. Evan reached out and took her hand. It was the first time he'd touched her intentionally, the first time he'd allowed himself to cross that line. Her fingers were cool and slender, and they wrapped around his like they belonged there. I want to figure this out, he said, whatever it takes, however long it takes. But I need to do it right, for Mia's sake, and for mine. Camilla nodded, and he saw tears slip down her cheeks. I've never done anything right, she whispered. Not when it comes to people. I don't know how. Then we'll learn together. Evan squeezed her hand. That's how it works, isn't it? Two broken people helping each other figure it out. She laughed then, a watery sound that was half sob and half relief. I suppose it is. They sat together in the fading afternoon light, hands intertwined, watching Mia sleep and the shadows lengthen across the manicured lawn. Behind them, the empty house waited, all 6,000 square feet of it, all 7 bedrooms and the wine cellar and the infinity pool that had never hosted a party. But for the first time since she'd bought it, Camilla didn't feel alone in those walls. And for the first time in years, Evan felt like maybe, just maybe, he wasn't failing at the things that mattered most. When Mia woke up an hour later, groggy and rumpled and asking for dinner, they ordered pizza and ate it in the formal dining room surrounded by contemporary art and designer furniture, laughing at the absurdity of cardboard boxes on a table worth more than most people's cars. And when Evan finally drove home that night, Mia sleeping again in the back seat, he felt something settle in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Not hope this time. Something deeper, something that felt like home. The summer months brought a rhythm to their lives that none of them had anticipated. Saturdays became something sacred. Afternoons at Camilla's house, where Mia would swim and draw and explore the gardens, while Evan and Camilla sat by the pool and talked about everything except the complicated thing growing between them. They were careful, cautious, moving with the deliberate slowness of two people who had been hurt before and couldn't afford to be hurt again. At work, they maintained strict professional boundaries. Evan reported to Helen Chen, not directly to Camilla, and their interactions in the office stayed focused on the wellness initiatives that continued to expand across the company. No one suspected anything, and that was exactly how they wanted it, at least for now. But outside those glass walls, something was shifting. Camilla began to appear at Mia's soccer games, sitting in the bleachers with a designer hat and sunglasses, cheering louder than any of the other parents. She learned Mia's favorite foods and started keeping them stocked in her professional-grade kitchen. She asked about school projects and remembered the names of Mia's friends and listened with genuine interest to long, rambling stories about comic books and art class. And Mia, with the uncomplicated wisdom of a 9-year-old, simply accepted her. "I like Camilla," she announced one evening as Evan tucked her into bed. "She's funny, and she doesn't talk to me like I'm stupid." "She likes you too, Bug." "Is she your girlfriend?" The question caught Evan off guard. He'd been dreading this conversation, rehearsing different versions of it in his head, trying to find the right words to explain something he barely understood himself. "It's complicated," he said finally. Mia rolled her eyes with an exasperation that seemed far too mature for her age. "Grown-ups always say that, but it's not really complicated. You like her. She likes you. That's not complicated at all. There are other things to consider, like my job, and making sure you're okay with, I just told you I like her." Mia pulled the covers up to her chin. "Stop making it complicated, Daddy." Evan stared at his daughter, marveling at how she could cut through his tangled thoughts with a single sentence. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been making it complicated, building obstacles where there didn't need to be any, finding reasons to stay scared when what he really wanted was to be brave. "I'll think about it," he said. "Good." Mia closed her eyes. "Now I need to sleep. I have soccer practice tomorrow, and Camilla said she'd teach me how to do headers." Evan kissed her forehead and turned off the light, shaking his head in wonder as he walked back to the living room. His 9-year-old daughter had just given him relationship advice, and the worst part was that she was probably right. The next morning, he called Camilla before he could talk himself out of it. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. "A real dinner. Not pizza in your dining room, not lunch in the corporate cafeteria. A proper date." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Camilla spoke, her voice was careful. "Are you sure? We talked about taking things slow." "Mia told me to stop making things complicated." A surprised laugh. "She said that?" "She also said that I like you and you like me, and that's not complicated at all." "Smart kid." "She gets it from her mother." The words came out before Evan could stop them, and he felt a brief pang of grief. Not for what he'd lost with Sarah, but for what he'd never had. "I know what you mean." Camilla's voice was gentle. "Friday night, there's a restaurant I've been wanting to try. I'll make reservations." "Nothing too fancy. I don't own anything appropriate for fancy." "Then we'll go somewhere that appreciates you exactly as you are." They went to a small Italian place in the Pearl District, intimate and warm, with candles on the tables and wine that cost more than Evan would have spent on a week's worth of groceries. But Camilla was right. He felt comfortable there, not out of place, not like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. They talked for 3 hours, about their childhoods and their dreams and the moments that had shaped them, about fears and hopes and the small, ordinary things that made life worth living. Camilla told him about her mother's death and her father's emotional absence and the decades she'd spent trying to earn approval from a man who didn't know how to give it. Evan told her about his father's heart attack and his own broken promises and the guilt that still gnawed at him when he thought about all the time he'd wasted. "We're quite a pair," Camilla said over dessert. "Two people who've spent their lives running from intimacy, trying to figure out how to stop." "Is that what we're doing? Figuring it out?" "I hope so." She reached across the table and took his hand. "I know I'm not easy, Evan. I know I have walls that would take a lifetime to dismantle, but I'm trying. For the first time in my life, I'm actually trying. That's all I can ask. And you?" Her eyes searched his face. "What do you want from this? From us?" Evan thought about the question. He thought about Mia and her simple wisdom, about the life he'd built from the ashes of his failures, about the woman sitting across from him who had shown up at his door on Christmas night and changed everything. "I want to wake up every day next to someone who sees me," he said. "Not the version of me that looks good on paper, not the person I pretend to be when I'm trying to impress people. The real me. The tired, scared, sometimes failing me." He squeezed her hand. "And I want to see them the same way. The real them." All of it. Camilla's eyes glistened in the candlelight. I think I can do that, she whispered. Then let's find out. The news of their relationship spread through Vance Industries like wildfire, despite their best efforts at discretion. Someone had seen them at the restaurant. Someone else had noticed Camilla's car parked outside Evan's apartment building. By the following Monday, the whispers had reached a fever pitch. Gregory Stanton was the first to make it official. He requested a meeting with Camilla, and Evan knew without being told what it was about. He's going to try to use this against you, Evan said when Camilla told him. They were in her office, speaking in low voices, the weight of corporate scrutiny pressing down on them. Against both of us. Let him try. Camilla's jaw was set with determination. We haven't done anything wrong. Our relationship doesn't affect my ability to run this company. He'll argue that I only got this position because of personal favoritism. Then he'll be wrong. You got this position because you're the best person for it. The fact that I fell in love with you afterward doesn't change that. The words stopped Evan cold. You said, I know what I said. Camilla met his eyes. Did you think I was going to keep hiding it? Evan felt something bloom in his chest, warm and terrifying and wonderful all at once. I love you too. She smiled, and for a moment the corporate politics and the whispered rumors and the looming confrontation with Stanton all faded away. There was only this, two people who had found each other against all odds, standing together in the face of whatever came next. Then let's go face the wolves, Camilla said. Together. The meeting with Stanton was worse than Evan had expected. The CFO had prepared a formal complaint alleging conflict of interest, improper use of executive authority, and a pattern of favoritism that he claimed had compromised the integrity of the company's wellness initiatives. He presented his case with the cold precision of a prosecutor, laying out timelines and incidents and extrapolating connections that painted Evan and Camilla in the worst possible light. The relationship between Ms. Vance and Mr. Hart represents a fundamental breach of professional ethics, Stanton concluded, his voice dripping with barely concealed satisfaction. I move that Mr. Hart be immediately removed from his position and that the wellness programs be suspended pending an independent investigation. Eleanor Vance, who had been silent throughout the presentation, spoke up. Gregory, how long have you been waiting to make this accusation? Stanton blinked. I'm sorry. It's a simple question. You've clearly been tracking my niece's personal life with considerable attention. How long have you been building this case? The irregularities came to my attention several weeks ago, and yet you didn't raise concerns until now. Until you had enough ammunition to do maximum damage. Eleanor's voice was ice. I've known you for 30 years, Gregory. I know how you operate. This isn't about ethics or company integrity. This is about power. With respect, Eleanor, my motivations are not the issue here. Your motivations are exactly the issue. Eleanor turned to the rest of the board. I've reviewed the wellness programs extensively. The results speak for themselves. Reduced turnover, increased productivity, improved employee satisfaction across every metric that matters. Whatever personal relationship may exist between Camilla and Mr. Hart, it has not compromised the quality of their work. The appearance of impropriety is something you've manufactured to serve your own agenda. Eleanor stood, her small frame suddenly commanding the entire room. I'm going to say something I should have said years ago. Gregory, you've been waiting for Camilla to fail since the day she took over this company. You've undermined her decisions, questioned her judgment, and done everything in your power to prove that she wasn't fit to lead. And now, when she's achieved something genuinely meaningful, when she's built programs that are changing people's lives, you're trying to tear it all down because you can't stand to see her succeed. The room had gone deadly quiet. My brother built this company, Eleanor continued, and yes, he made Gregory his protege, and maybe he even promised him the leadership role. But my brother also taught me that a leader's job is to serve the people who depend on them. And from where I'm sitting, Camilla has done that better than you ever could. She turned to the board. I move that we dismiss this complaint and affirm our support for both the wellness initiatives and Camilla's leadership. All in favor? The vote was overwhelming. Only Stanton and one ally voted against. After the meeting, Gregory Stanton cleaned out his desk and left Vance Industries for the last time. No one said goodbye. The months that followed were a period of transformation for Evan, for Camilla, for the company, and for the way they understood what family could mean. The wellness programs expanded to every department, every location, every corner of the Vance Industries empire. Flexible scheduling became company policy. On-site childcare opened at the corporate headquarters, with plans to extend to regional offices within the year. Mental health resources were no longer a pilot program, but a permanent fixture, available to every employee without stigma or limitation. And the results continued to exceed expectations. Turnover dropped by 40%. Productivity climbed. Employee satisfaction scores reached levels the company had never seen before. The business press took notice, and Camilla found herself giving interviews about the human-centered approach that was reshaping corporate culture. But she always redirected the credit. "This wasn't my idea," she told a reporter from the Portland Business Journal. "It started with a conversation on Christmas night with someone who reminded me that the people behind the numbers are what really matter." The reporter had asked who that someone was, and Camilla had smiled. "Someone I was lucky enough to find." At home, because that's what Camilla's house had slowly become, the transformation was quieter but no less profound. Mia had her own room now, decorated with her artwork and filled with books and art supplies. She split her time between the West Hills estate and the apartment in Millbrook Gardens, though the apartment felt less like home with each passing month. The Hendersons noticed the change. Margaret called one evening in September, her voice careful but not hostile. "Mia seems happy," she said. "Happier than I've seen her in a long time." "She is," Evan agreed. "We both are." "I heard about your relationship with Camilla Vance. It's been in the news." Evan braced himself for judgment, but it didn't come. "I want you to know that Richard and we support you. Whatever makes Mia happy, whatever gives her a stable home, that's what matters to us." Margaret paused. "And I think Sarah would have wanted this for you, to find someone who sees you, who appreciates what you have to offer." Evan felt tears prick at his eyes. "Thank you, Margaret. That means more than you know. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't disappear into work again. You have something precious now. Don't let it slip away." "I won't," Evan said. "I promise." Autumn arrived in Portland with its usual pageant of colors, red and gold and orange blanketing the streets, the air crisp with the promise of change. Evan found himself marking time differently now, not in deadlines and quarterly reports, but in moments. Mia's first art show at school, where her comic book illustrations won second place. Camilla's birthday dinner, where she blew out candles on a homemade cake and laughed until she cried. Sunday mornings in the kitchen, the three of them making pancakes while music played and sunlight streamed through the windows. These were the moments he'd been too busy to notice before. These were the moments he'd sacrificed in the name of work and ambition and all the things he'd thought mattered. But now he understood what really mattered, and he held on to it with both hands. One evening in late October, Camilla found him on the back patio, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. "You're thinking too hard," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "I can hear it from inside." Evan smiled. "I'm thinking about how different everything is. A year ago, I was sitting alone in my apartment, convinced I was failing at everything that mattered. Now I have more than I ever thought I deserved." Camilla reached over and took his hand. "You deserve all of it, Evan, every bit of happiness that comes your way. So do you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Somewhere inside the house, Mia was playing music, something loud and upbeat that filtered through the windows like joy made audible. "I've been thinking about something," Camilla said finally. "Tell me." "The apartment at Millbrook Gardens. You've been holding on to it, but you're barely there anymore." Evan nodded slowly. "I know, I keep telling myself I need to maintain it in case this doesn't work out. Is that what you think? That this might not work out?" He turned to look at her, this woman who had transformed his life, who had taught him what it meant to be seen and valued and loved. "No," he said. "I don't think that anymore." "Then maybe it's time to let go of the safety net." Camilla's voice was gentle but sure. "I'm not asking you to move in for my sake. I'm asking because I think you're ready. I think you've been ready for a while, but you're scared to admit it." She was right, of course. The apartment had become a symbol of his old life, The life where he'd been alone and struggling and convinced that he didn't deserve anything better. Holding on to it was holding on to that version of himself, and he didn't want to be that person anymore. "What about Mia?" he asked. "I need to make sure she's comfortable with—" "She already asked me when you were going to stop paying rent on a place you don't live." Camilla laughed at his expression. "Your daughter is more observant than you give her credit for." Evan shook his head in wonder. "She really is something. She gets it from her father." The words were simple, but they carried weight, an acknowledgement of who Evan had become, of the man he'd grown into through struggle and failure, and eventually, finally, through letting himself be loved. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it. Let's make this official." The move happened over a weekend in early November. Evan packed his modest belongings, the photographs, the books, the few pieces of furniture worth keeping, and transported them to the house in the West Hills that had once felt like a museum and now felt like home. Mia supervised the process with the seriousness of a general commanding troops, directing Evan and Camilla on where each item should go. "The photos belong in the living room," she declared, "so everyone who visits can see them." "What about my books?" Evan asked. "The study, obviously." Mia rolled her eyes. "You need a proper place to read, Daddy." Camilla watched the interaction with barely contained amusement. "She's going to run this household within a month." "She already does," Evan said. "We're just here to follow orders." That night, after the boxes were unpacked and the apartment keys returned to the building manager, the three of them ordered Chinese food and ate it on the living room floor, surrounded by the blended evidence of their new life together. Photographs from Evan's past sat alongside Camilla's contemporary art. Mia's drawings were already tacked to the refrigerator with magnets shaped like cats. It wasn't perfect. The merging of three lives never was. There would be arguments and adjustments, moments of friction when old habits clashed with new realities. But as Evan looked at Camilla and Mia, laughing over fortune cookies and debating which movie to watch, he knew that imperfect was enough. More than enough. It was everything. "I want to propose a toast," Camilla said, raising her can of soda with mock solemnity, "to new beginnings, to family, and to the midnight knock that started it all." "The midnight knock," Evan repeated, raising his own can. Mia looked confused. "What midnight knock?" Evan and Camilla exchanged a glance, the kind of glance that held 1,000 memories and 1,000 more yet to be made. "It's a long story," Evan said. "I'll tell you sometime." "Is it a good story?" Camilla smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The best kind," she said. "The kind that doesn't really end." The weeks leading up to Thanksgiving brought a new rhythm to their lives, a rhythm of shared meals and combined schedules, and the gradual weaving together of separate existences into something stronger than any of them could have built alone. Camilla learned to cook, not gourmet cuisine, she left that to the professionals, but simple things. Pancakes on Sunday mornings, grilled cheese sandwiches for Mia's lunch, pasta with jarred sauce on nights when no one wanted to think too hard about dinner. "This is terrible," she announced one evening, staring at a pot of overcooked spaghetti. "How do people do this every day?" "Practice," Evan said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, "and lower standards. My standards are not the problem. This pasta is the problem." "The pasta is fine. Stop being a perfectionist." They ate the overcooked spaghetti anyway, and Mia declared it the best she'd ever had, which made Camilla blush with a pleasure that had nothing to do with culinary achievement. At work, the changes continued. The wellness programs had become so successful that other companies were reaching out, asking for advice on implementing similar initiatives. Camilla started speaking at conferences, sharing the philosophy that had transformed Vance Industries, the belief that treating employees like human beings was not just morally right, but economically smart. Evan stood beside her at those conferences, no longer the warehouse worker who'd stumbled into an executive role, but a recognized expert in employee engagement. His story, the real version, not the sanitized corporate narrative, inspired people in ways that polished presentations never could. "You were nobody," a young HR manager said to him after one such conference. "No offense, I just mean, you started at the bottom. You know what it's like." "No offense taken," Evan said. "You're right. I do know what it's like." "How did you get here? How did you go from the warehouse to—" All of this. Evan thought about the question. He thought about Christmas night and the knock on his door and the woman who had been brave enough to show up when she could have stayed safe in her empty mansion. Someone took a chance on me, he said finally. Someone saw something in me that I couldn't see in myself. And when she offered me an opportunity, I was scared enough to take it. Scared enough? Sometimes being scared is what makes you brave. You can't be courageous if you're not afraid first. The young HR manager nodded slowly, as if Evan had said something profound. Maybe he had. Or maybe he just said something true, which was often the same thing. Thanksgiving arrived on a Thursday that dawned cold and clear, the kind of Pacific Northwest autumn day that made the world feel crisp and full of possibility. They celebrated at the house in the West Hills with a guest list that would have seemed impossible a year ago. The Hendersons came, Margaret and Richard navigating the unfamiliar territory of Camilla's home with the careful politeness of people trying to build bridges instead of walls. Helen Chen brought her husband and a spectacular pie. Maria from shipping arrived with her teenage son, who immediately bonded with Mia over a shared love of video games. Even Eleanor Vance made an appearance, surveying the gathered crowd with something that looked almost like satisfaction. "You've done well," she told Camilla as they stood in the kitchen, watching Evan help Mia set the table. "Your mother would be proud." Camilla felt tears prick at her eyes. "Thank you, Aunt Eleanor. That means more than you know." "I know exactly what it means. That's why I said it." Eleanor placed a weathered hand on Camilla's arm. "I wasn't always kind to you when you took over the company. I doubted you, questioned your decisions, waited for you to fail. I was wrong. You were protecting the family legacy. I was being a stubborn old woman who couldn't see past her own assumptions." Eleanor's gaze drifted to Evan, who was now teaching Mia how to fold napkins into elaborate shapes. "He's good for you. Both of them are." "They're everything," Camilla said simply. "Then hold on to them. Don't let fear or pride or anything else get in the way of what you have." Eleanor squeezed her arm. "Life is too short for regrets, my dear. I should know." When they sat down for dinner, the table groaning under the weight of turkey and stuffing and all the traditional accompaniments, Evan stood to offer a toast. "A year ago," he began, "I spent Thanksgiving alone in a warehouse, working overtime because I didn't have anywhere else to be. I'd convinced myself that was fine, that I didn't deserve holidays or happiness or the kinds of moments that other people took for granted." He looked around the table, at the faces of people who had become his family in ways he never expected. "I was wrong. What I've learned this year is that deserving has nothing to do with it. Love isn't something you earn. It's something you receive and give and build together, piece by piece, day by day. And I'm grateful, more grateful than I can say, to everyone at this table for teaching me that." His eyes found Camilla's. "Especially you," he said, "for showing up at my door when you didn't have to, for seeing something in me that I couldn't see, for being brave enough to build this life with me, even when it would have been easier to stay alone." Camilla raised her glass, and her voice was thick with emotion when she spoke. "To family," she said, "the kind you're born with and the kind you choose." "To family," the table echoed, and as they drank and ate and laughed together, the house that had once been empty filled with something that couldn't be measured or quantified or captured in any quarterly report. It filled with love. The year turned, and with it came the anniversary that none of them had consciously planned for, but all of them felt approaching like a tide. December arrived in Portland with its familiar mix of rain and occasional snow, the city transforming once again into a winter wonderland of lights and decorations and the particular kind of hope that only the holiday season could bring. Evan found himself thinking about the previous Christmas more and more as the month progressed. It seemed impossible that only 12 months had passed since that night, the night when a knock on his door had shattered everything he thought he knew about his life and rebuilt it into something he hadn't dared to imagine. The company Christmas party was scheduled for December 20th, and this year it would be different. The wellness initiatives had transformed not just policies but culture, and the celebration reflected that change. Instead of a formal affair in a rented ballroom, Camilla had organized a family-friendly event at the corporate headquarters, with activities for children and food stations, and a secret Santa exchange that included everyone from the executive suite to the warehouse floor. Evan walked through the decorated lobby, watching employees mingle with their families, seeing faces that had become familiar over the past year. Maria from shipping was there with her husband and her soccer-playing son. Devin from receiving had brought his mother and younger siblings, all of them wide-eyed at the festive displays. Patricia from HR stood in the corner, her arm around a young woman who could only be her formerly estranged daughter. Their reunion still new enough to bring tears to both their eyes. These were the stories that mattered, Evan thought, not the quarterly earnings reports or the productivity metrics or the stock prices that rose and fell with the market's whims. These moments of human connection, of families reunited and relationships healed, and people who finally felt seen, this was what they had built together. Camilla found him standing by the Christmas tree, a towering Douglas fir that the facilities team had decorated with ornaments submitted by employees from around the company. There were hand-painted bulbs from the regional offices, origami cranes from the international divisions, photographs of families and pets, and the small, precious moments that made up people's lives outside these walls. "You're doing that thing again," she said, slipping her hand into his. "What thing?" "Standing off to the side, watching everyone else be happy, not quite believing you belong here." Evan smiled ruefully. "Old habits. We need to break those." Camilla squeezed his hand. "Because you do belong here, more than anyone else in this room. None of this would exist without you." "It would exist. You would have found another way." "Maybe, but it wouldn't be the same." She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw the reflection of the lights, the warmth of the room, the love that had grown between them over the past year. "You taught me what this was supposed to look like, Evan. You showed me the human side of everything I'd been doing wrong. That's not nothing." Before he could respond, Mia appeared between them, her face flushed with excitement. "Daddy, Camilla, you have to come see. They have a craft station where you can make ornaments, and I made one for each of us, and there's hot chocolate with real marshmallows. And I saw Santa and he remembered my name from last year." The words tumbled out in a rush, and Evan felt his heart swell with the simple joy of a child who believed in magic. He remembered last Christmas when Mia had been at the Hendersons' house, and he'd been alone in his apartment, convinced he had nothing to celebrate. Now he had everything. "Show us," he said, letting Mia grab his hand and pull him toward the craft station. Camilla followed, laughing, and as they moved through the crowd, Evan saw heads turning, not with judgment or suspicion, the way they had in those early months when the rumors first started circulating. Now the looks were different, admiring, affectionate, the kind of attention that people gave to couples who seemed genuinely happy. They had earned that. Slowly, carefully, through months of proving that their relationship didn't compromise their work, and their work didn't compromise their relationship. They had shown the company what it looked like when personal and professional could coexist without conflict. And in doing so, they had given permission for others to do the same. The ornaments Mia had made were beautiful in the way that only children's art could be, imperfect and heartfelt and utterly unique. One showed a house with 3 figures standing in front of it, stick figure people with wild hair and bright smiles. Another depicted a swimming pool with a tiny person floating on their back, the water rendered in layers of blue glitter. The third was simply 3 names written in careful, uneven letters. Daddy, Camilla, Mia. "Do you like them?" Mia asked, her voice suddenly uncertain. "I know they're not as pretty as the ones you can buy at the store, but—" "They're perfect," Camilla said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word. "They're absolutely perfect." Evan looked at her. This woman who had commanded boardrooms and negotiated billion-dollar deals and faced down hostile board members without flinching, and saw tears glistening in her eyes over a child's glitter-covered ornament. That was the miracle, he thought, not the business success or the cultural transformation or any of the accomplishments they could point to on a resume. The miracle was this: 2 broken people who had learned to let themselves be loved, 2 guarded hearts that had finally opened, a family built not from obligation, but from choice. They hung the ornaments on the company tree together, all 3 of them, and when Mia asked if they could take them home afterward, Camilla said yes without hesitation. "They belong on our tree," she said, "our family tree." The days between the company party and Christmas Eve passed in a blur of final preparations and quiet anticipation. Evan finished his year-end reports and submitted them early for the first time in his career. Camilla cleared her calendar of everything except essential meetings, delegating more than she ever had before. Mia counted down the days on the advent calendar they'd bought together, her excitement building with each chocolate she discovered behind each tiny door. On the morning of December 24th, Evan woke before the others and lay in bed, listening to the quiet sounds of the house. Camilla's breathing beside him, slow and peaceful, the distant hum of the heating system, the faint rustle of wind against the windows. 1 year ago, he had woken to silence in a different way, the suffocating silence of loneliness, of an empty apartment and an empty life. He had told himself he was fine. He had told himself he didn't need anyone. How wrong he had been. He slipped out of bed and made his way to the kitchen, starting the coffee and watching the sky lighten through the window. Snow had been forecast, and already the clouds had that heavy gray look that promised precipitation. Maybe they would have a white Christmas. Mia would love that. "You're up early." He turned to find Camilla standing in the doorway, wrapped in a robe, her hair tousled from sleep. Even now, after all these months, the sight of her made his breath catch. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because she was here. She had chosen to be here, in this life they had built together. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Good thoughts, though. Not bad ones." She crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her head against his chest. "What kind of good thoughts?" "About how much can change in a year, about how grateful I am for everything we have." "I've been having those thoughts too." She pulled back to look at him. "I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to go wrong." "Maybe nothing will." "Maybe." She smiled, but there was a shadow behind it. "I've just never had this much to lose before. It's terrifying." Evan understood. He felt it too. The fear that came with loving deeply, the vulnerability of having your heart walking around outside your body. But he'd also learned, over the past year, that the alternative was worse. "We could play it safe," he said. "Build walls. Protect ourselves from the possibility of pain." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "But then we'd miss all of this. The joy, the connection, the feeling of being truly known. I don't want to miss it, Camilla. Not anymore." She rose on her toes and kissed him, soft and slow. "Neither do I." They spent the day in a pleasant bustle of activity, finishing the wrapping, preparing the food for tomorrow's dinner, fielding calls from friends and colleagues who wanted to wish them happy holidays. The Hendersons stopped by in the afternoon with gifts for Mia and, to Evan's surprise, gifts for him and Camilla as well. "We're family now," Margaret said simply, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. By evening, the snow had begun to fall, fat, lazy flakes that drifted down like a blessing, blanketing the world in white. They built a fire in the fireplace and settled in the living room with hot chocolate and Christmas movies, Mia wedged between them on the couch, her eyes fighting sleep even as she insisted she wasn't tired. "Daddy," she mumbled around 9 o'clock, her voice thick with approaching dreams. "This is the best Christmas Eve ever." Evan looked at Camilla over his daughter's head and saw his own emotions reflected in her eyes, wonder, gratitude, the particular ache of happiness almost too big to contain. "It really is, Bug," he said. "It really is." They carried Mia to bed together, tucking her in with the careful tenderness of parents who understood how precious these moments were. She was growing so fast, nearly 10 now, on the cusp of changes that would transform her from a little girl into something approaching a young woman. They would have fewer years of Christmas magic, fewer nights of unconditional belief in the wonder of the season. But they would have this one, and that was enough. Back in the living room, with Mia asleep and the fire burning low, Evan and Camilla sat together on the couch and watched the snow fall through the window. "I have something for you," Camilla said. "I was going to wait until morning, but I don't think I can." She reached beneath the coffee table and produced a small box, wrapped in elegant silver paper with a white bow. Evan took it, his heart beating faster. "I thought we agreed to wait." "I know, but this is different. This isn't really a Christmas present." She met his eyes. "Open it." He unwrapped the paper slowly, revealing a velvet jewelry box. Inside, nestled against dark fabric, was a key. Not ornamental, A real key, brass and substantial, attached to a simple silver keychain. "I don't understand," he said. "It's the key to the beach house." Camilla's voice was quiet. "The one in Cannon Beach that my mother used to take me to when I was little. I've owned it for 20 years, but I've never been back. Too many memories." Evan thought about the photograph on his bookshelf, the one of him and Sarah and Mia at Cannon Beach, building sandcastles that the tide would claim before sunset. "You want me to go there?" "I want us to go there. All three of us." She took his hand. "I want to make new memories in that place. Happy memories to replace the painful ones." She paused. "And I want you to know that you have a home with me, Evan. Not just here, but wherever I am. Wherever we are together." Evan looked at the key in his hand, this simple object that represented so much. Trust, commitment, a future built on shared experiences and mutual healing. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate, but they were all he had. "There's more." Camilla reached into her robe pocket and produced another small box, this one clearly a ring box. "I know this isn't traditional. I know I'm supposed to wait for you to do this. But I've spent my whole life doing what I was supposed to do, and I'm tired of it." She opened the box, revealing a simple gold band. "Evan Hart," she said, "I've spent 44 years building walls around my heart. You knocked them down in a single night. You showed me what it means to be seen, to be known, to be loved for exactly who I am. And I don't want to spend another day without making this official." Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air between them, illuminated by firelight and falling snow. Evan thought about everything that had led to this moment, the failures and losses, the grief and loneliness, the long years of believing he didn't deserve happiness. He thought about Christmas night a year ago and the knock that had changed everything. He thought about Mia, asleep upstairs, and the family they had already become. "Yes," he said, 1,000 times yes." Camilla slid the ring onto his finger. A perfect fit, as if it had been made for him. And then they were kissing and crying and holding each other in front of the fire while the snow continued to fall and the world outside grew quiet and white and full of possibility. When they finally pulled apart, both of them laughing through their tears, Evan cupped her face in his hands. "I have something for you too," he said. "It's not as dramatic, but..." He reached into his pocket and produced his own small box. Inside was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a pendant shaped like a door. "I had it made," he explained, "after the night we met, the night you knocked on my door and changed my life." Camilla lifted the pendant, turning it in the firelight. On the back, in tiny engraved letters, were the words, "Every ending is a beginning." "Evan," she whispered, "you taught me that. You showed me that endings, even the painful ones, are just the start of something new. I was so afraid of losing what I had that I couldn't see what I might gain." He fastened the necklace around her neck. "Now, I'm not afraid anymore." They stayed up late talking about plans and dreams and all the things they wanted to build together. A wedding in the spring, small and intimate, with only the people who mattered most. A honeymoon to the beach house, where they would start filling those empty rooms with laughter and light. More initiatives at the company, more programs to help the people who needed it most. And through it all, the steady foundation of family. Mia growing up in a home filled with love, Evan and Camilla learning new ways to be partners and parents and human beings. It wouldn't be perfect. They both knew that. There would be challenges and setbacks, moments when old fears resurfaced and old wounds reopened. But they had proven, over the past year, that they could face those moments together. That was the real miracle, Evan thought, as they finally climbed the stairs to bed, hand in hand. Not that two broken people had found each other, but that they had chosen to stay, to keep showing up, to keep knocking on doors and letting doors be opened. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear, the snow from the night before sparkling under a sky of impossible blue. Mia was up at 6, bouncing on their bed with the barely contained energy of a child who had been waiting for this moment all year. "Presents! Presents! It's Christmas! Wake up!" They let her drag them downstairs, laughing at her impatience, and settled around the tree to exchange gifts. There were practical things and frivolous things, heartfelt things and silly things, the accumulated evidence of a family that knew each other well and loved each other better. But the moment that would stay with Evan forever came after the presents were opened and the wrapping paper was cleared away. They were sitting on the floor together, the three of them, surrounded by the warm glow of Christmas lights and the smell of pancakes cooking in the kitchen. Mia looked at the ring on Evan's finger, then at the necklace around Camilla's neck. "Does this mean you're getting married?" she asked. Evan and Camilla exchanged a glance. They had planned to tell her more carefully, to prepare her for the change, but Mia had never needed much preparation. She had always understood, on some fundamental level, what mattered and what didn't. "Yes," Camilla said, "if that's okay with you." Mia considered this for a moment, her expression serious. Then she launched herself at both of them, wrapping her arms around them in a hug so fierce it nearly knocked them over. "It's okay," she said into their combined embrace. "It's more than okay. It's perfect." They held each other for a long time, the three of them, while outside the windows the Christmas sun climbed higher and the snow began its slow transformation from pristine white to the slushy gray of ordinary life. But inside, there was nothing ordinary about this moment. Inside, there was only love, imperfect and hard-won and precious beyond measure. The wedding took place on a Saturday in April, under a canopy of cherry blossoms in the garden of the West Hills house. The guest list was small. The Hendersons, Helen Chen, and her husband Eleanor Vance, a handful of close friends and colleagues who had become part of their extended family over the past year. Mia served as both flower girl and ring bearer, a responsibility she took with the utmost seriousness. She walked down the aisle in a pale pink dress that she had helped choose, scattering rose petals with careful precision, a velvet pillow bearing 2 gold bands clutched to her chest. When she reached the front, she handed the rings to her father and then wrapped her arms around him. "I'm so happy, Daddy," she whispered. "Me too, Bug. Me too." Camilla walked down the aisle alone, her choice made after long consideration. She had no father to give her away, no one whose approval she needed to seek. She came to Evan as herself, complete and whole, offering not just her heart, but her freedom. The vows they exchanged were simple, written together in the quiet hours of late nights and early mornings. They promised to be patient with each other's flaws, to celebrate each other's strengths, to build a home where love was spoken as fluently as any other language. And when the officiant pronounced them married, when Evan kissed Camilla while their guests cheered and Mia bounced with excitement, he felt something settle into place inside him, a piece he hadn't known was missing until it was finally found. The first year of marriage was everything they had hoped and nothing they had expected. There were adjustments to make, compromises to negotiate, moments when the weight of merging 2 established lives felt heavier than either of them had anticipated. But there were also moments of transcendent joy. Mia's art show, where her comic book series about a girl who travels through dimensions won first place and earned her a feature in the local newspaper. The expansion of the wellness programs to Vance Industries' international offices, bringing the human-centered approach to employees around the world. Long weekends at the beach house, where Evan and Camilla built sandcastles with Mia and watched the tide claim them without sadness. At work, the changes they had begun continued to ripple outward. Other companies adopted similar programs, citing Vance Industries as a model. Business schools included case studies about their approach in management courses. And the employees, the people who had always been at the heart of everything, thrived in ways that showed up not just in metrics, but in faces that smiled more easily and voices that spoke with more confidence. One afternoon in December, as the second Christmas of their marriage approached, Evan sat in his office reviewing the annual employee satisfaction report. The numbers were better than ever, but it wasn't the statistics that caught his attention. It was a section at the end where employees had been invited to share personal testimonials. Before the wellness programs, I was considering quitting. I couldn't balance work and my son's medical appointments. Now I can be there for him when he needs me. This company saved my family. I've worked here for 15 years, and this is the first year I've felt like more than a number. Someone finally sees us. Mr. Hart came to my department last month and listened to us for 2 hours. Actually, listened. I've never experienced anything like it. Evan read through the testimonials with tears in his eyes, thinking about how far they had come. These stories, these lives touched and improved, were the real measure of success. Not the stock price or the quarterly earnings, but the simple, profound impact of treating people like they mattered. A knock on his office door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in." Camilla entered, her expression warm with the particular affection she reserved for moments when they were alone. "Hiding in here?" "Reading the employee reports. There's some incredible stuff in here." She crossed to his desk and bent to look at the screen, her hand resting on his shoulder. "I saw those. Maria's story made me cry. Everything makes you cry these days. That's because I'm happy. I never used to cry when I was miserable." She pressed a kiss to the top of his head. "I came to tell you that Mia's school called. She got into the gifted art program." Evan's face split into a grin. "That's fantastic. She's been hoping for months. I thought we could celebrate tonight. Take her to that Italian place she likes." "Perfect." Camilla started to leave, then paused at the door. "Evan?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for all of this." She gestured vaguely, encompassing the office, the company, the life they had built. "I know I say it all the time, but I mean it. Everything good in my life started with you." "Everything good in my life started with you too." He smiled. "With a knock on my door in the middle of the night. The best decision I ever made." "Mine too." She left, and Evan returned to the reports, but his mind was elsewhere, wandering through the past, marveling at the present, dreaming about the future. 2 years ago, he had been a man holding his life together with determination and desperation, convinced he was failing at everything that mattered. Now he was a husband and a father, a leader and a partner, someone who had learned that the deepest strength came not from isolation but from connection. The journey wasn't over, it never would be, but that was the beauty of it, the continuous unfolding of possibility, the daily choice to show up and keep trying and let yourself be loved. On Christmas Eve, almost exactly 2 years after the knock that had started everything, Evan sat in the living room of their home, watching Camilla and Mia decorate the tree. They had established their own traditions now, specific ornaments hung in specific places, particular songs played in a particular order, rituals that were already acquiring the comfortable patina of memory. Mia was nearly 11 now, still young enough for Christmas magic, but old enough to understand that the real magic wasn't in presents or Santa. It was in moments like this, family gathered together, taking time to celebrate not just the holiday, but each other. "Daddy, come help," she called. "The star goes on top, and you're the tallest." Evan set down his cocoa and crossed to the tree, lifting the silver star that Mia had chosen 2 years ago. It wasn't the elegant topper that Camilla's designer had originally selected. It was simple and slightly crooked, with glitter that shed onto everything it touched. But it was theirs. He placed it on the highest branch, adjusting it until it sat straight, and stepped back to admire their work. "Perfect," Camilla said. "Almost," Evan agreed. He wrapped his arms around both of them, his wife on one side, his daughter on the other, and held them close while the lights blinked and the fire crackled and snow began to fall outside the windows. "Now it's perfect," he said. Later that night, after Mia was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Evan and Camilla sat on the porch, bundled in blankets, watching the snow accumulate on the garden. "Do you ever think about that night?" Camilla asked. "The night I showed up at your door?" "All the time." "What do you think would have happened if you hadn't answered?" Evan considered the question. He had thought about it often over the past 2 years, the sliding door moment that had changed everything, the thin line between the life he had now and the life he might have continued living. "I think I would have answered eventually," he said slowly. "Maybe not that night, but eventually. Because you weren't just knocking on my door, Camilla. You were knocking on something inside me, something that was ready to be opened, even if I didn't know it yet. And me? You were ready too. We found each other at exactly the right moment, both of us broken in ways that fit together, both of us desperate for connection we didn't know how to ask for." He pulled her closer. "I believe that. I believe we were supposed to find each other." Camilla was quiet for a long moment, her breath making clouds in the cold air. "I used to think the world was random," she said finally, "that things happened without reason or design. and the best you could do was survive them. But now I'm not so sure. What changed? You did. We did. She turned to look at him, her eyes bright in the reflected light of the snow. When I drove around Portland that Christmas night, I told myself I was just avoiding my father's party. But I think part of me was looking for something, searching for a door that might let me in. And you found one. I found you. She smiled. You were everything I didn't know I needed. Patient when I was difficult, kind when I was cold, steady when I was falling apart. You never asked me to be anyone other than who I was. I couldn't. I loved who you were. Even the broken parts? Especially the broken parts. They were what let the light in. They sat together as the snow continued to fall, covering the world in white, erasing the tracks of the old year and preparing a blank canvas for the new one. Somewhere in the house, Mia dreamed of Christmas morning. Somewhere in the city, other families gathered, other love stories unfolded, other lives were transformed by small acts of courage and connection. I'm glad you knocked, Evan said. I'm glad you answered. I'm glad we didn't give up. I'm glad we're here. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything they had survived and everything they had built. 2 years of growth and change and learning what it meant to be a family. 2 years of choosing each other, again and again, through challenges and triumphs and ordinary days that added up to an extraordinary life. The snow fell harder now, blanketing the garden in white, muffling the sounds of the city and creating a cocoon of quiet around their home. Inside, the fire was dying down, the tree lights blinking their patient rhythm, the house holding its breath in anticipation of another Christmas morning. Evan stood and offered Camilla his hand. Come on, he said. It's late. She took his hand and let him pull her to her feet, pausing on the threshold to look back at the snow-covered garden one last time. It's beautiful, she said. It is. We're lucky. We are. They went inside together, leaving the cold and the snow behind, walking into the warmth of the home they had made. The door closed softly behind them, sealing out the night, keeping safe everything they had built. And in that small, ordinary moment, a door closing, a hand held, a step taken together, was the whole of their miracle. Not grand gestures or dramatic rescues, but the daily deliberate choice to love and be loved, to show up, to keep trying, to believe that broken things could be mended and empty spaces could be filled and lonely hearts could find their way home. The Christmas lights blinked on, casting colored shadows across the room. The fire crackled its last, settling into embers. Upstairs, their daughter dreamed of morning, and Evan and Camilla climbed the stairs together, hand in hand, stepping into the rest of their lives. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside, there was only warmth, only love. Only the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. Because that was the real gift, not of Christmas, but of every day that followed. The gift of showing up, the gift of being seen, the gift of a door that opened when someone was brave enough to knock. And in the end, that was the only miracle that mattered.